I looked at the massive mutant boar lying motionless on the ground and really couldn't bear to leave it behind. Mutant boar meat can stay fresh for a whole month even in 30-degree humidity. Leaving it here would be a heartbreaking waste. Besides, the previous owner made it clear that mutant meat isn't just a raw material for gene evolution fluid in a biolab. Even eating it directly can slowly improve one's physical constitution. Even without a lab, just cooking a meal of boar meat would be a luxury. A stronger body also means less fatigue when operating and moving a steel mass weighing hundreds of kilograms. I was born into an ordinary family and grew up used to scarcity. After my parents passed away, my sister and I had to sell our house and rely on each other to survive. Thriftiness is practically etched into my bones. The thought of leaving all this mutant meat behind felt like a stab to the heart. No way. Even without a storage space, I have to take this boar with me. In the apocalypse, gold and silver are no different from scrap metal. Paper money is worth less than toilet paper. The only thing with real trade value between humans is food. Humanity will realize the value of mutant meat sooner or later. Eating it strengthens the body, and in a world full of zombies, a better physique means a much higher survival rate. On top of that, mutant meat is easy to preserve. It can last through autumn and winter without spoiling. Its value far exceeds ordinary food. Wasting it is the ultimate sin. If I can't carry it, I'll find a way to drag it. I made up my mind, but space in the base vehicle was limited. There was no way I could cram nearly 10 tons of meat inside. I immediately thought of the small truck parked not far away. The truck looked old. Running in a remote countryside like this, it definitely wasn't top tier. It was probably close to retirement. I ran over and pulled the door handle. Locked, of course. Without hesitating, I headed back to the ruins of the spicy fish restaurant. The driver likely stopped here for a meal, but perished when the apocalypse broke out. The keys were probably on his body, but before me was a mess of bloody mud and shredded flesh. It had been trampled by both the mutant boar and the base vehicle. Finding a key in that was like looking for a needle in a haystack. After a moment's thought, I gave up on that. I went to the repair shop next door, found a wrench, and smashed the windshield. A loud crash echoed as the glass shattered into tiny beads. I climbed through the window into the cabin. The beaded glass wasn't dangerous. Sitting in the driver's seat, I pulled the handbrake and immediately found a tow rope about 9 meters long. Just as I thought. This kind of rope is practically mandatory on these old trucks. I immediately hitched the truck to the base vehicle and opened the back door. It was empty. Things were going smoother than expected. Looking at that giant boar, I knew this would be backbreaking work. I couldn't take it whole. The only way was to butcher it. I strapped a knife to my hip, found a fire axe and a hacksaw, and got to work. I exercised regularly in college, so my stamina was decent. I aimed for the boar's neck and swung hard. Nearly 10 tons of meat. I'd take as much as I could. To my surprise, after removing the mutant crystal, the meat became much softer. The hacksaw cut through it easily, just like processing normal pork. Just then, I heard Wen Xiaoyan calling from inside the base vehicle, her voice laced with panic. She had just regained consciousness and was terrified to see the wreckage and the cracked, bulletproof glass without me in sight. I called back, and she let out a sigh of relief. She stumbled out of the vehicle, but when she saw me holding an axe, butchering the dead mutant boar, she stood there completely stunned. She had witnessed the horror of that monster firsthand as it crushed a row of houses like cardboard. Now, it was just a pile of still meat. She asked what I was doing. I simply told her I was taking the meat. It's edible. She didn't ask further and just offered to help. Even though her forehead was covered in blood and she looked a mess, I hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Meat needs to be processed as quickly as possible. This place might be deserted, but there's no guarantee zombies aren't wandering nearby. I bandaged her wound, and together we began hacking off large chunks of bright red meat. The lean meat was firm, its color even deeper than high-grade beef. Each chunk weighed dozens of pounds. We cut hundreds of them, moving them trip after trip to the small truck. I even stuffed the truck bed with the boar's bones. By the time we finished, we were both exhausted. Luckily, no zombies showed up during the entire process. I returned to the base vehicle and collapsed onto the sofa. That life and death battle had drained every bit of my strength, but my heart was full of joy. No matter how cruel the apocalypse gets, as long as I have this base vehicle and the seed, I believe I can find a way to survive. After the battle with the mutant boar and the butchering, both when Xiaodian and I were spent, so hungry we barely had any strength left. I lay sprawled on the sofa, too lazy to even move a finger. Meanwhile, when Xiaodian, despite her exhaustion, insisted on cooking, she used the chili and spices left over from the small restaurant to make two simple dishes: boiled meat and stir-fried meat, all using the mutant boar. Before the food even hit the table, the aroma filled the cabin, making my mouth water uncontrollably. Just from the smell, I knew this mutant boar meat was top-notch, something I had vaguely guessed earlier. When I was cutting it, there was no gamey smell at all. Instead, it had a faint, pleasant fragrance. Now that theory was confirmed. My stomach was growling so hard it felt like it was sticking to my spine. How could I resist? But I waited. I waited until the final dish was served: braised pork that had simmered for 40 minutes. The moment the lid was lifted, the sauce had thickened into a seductive red glaze. Placing a trembling piece of meat onto a bowl of hot rice, it felt like something even the gods wouldn't trade. I couldn't stop smiling after the first bite. Only one thought crossed my mind. This might be the best thing I've ever eaten. I used to think that after the apocalypse, even if I didn't starve, I'd be living off instant noodles at best. Who would have thought I'd be sitting here eating steaming braised pork? If I can get even stronger, maybe the apocalypse won't be so bad after all. As I was thinking, I felt a warmth in my stomach, like a faint surge of energy spreading through my body. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was there. I knew this was the physical enhancement effect of the mutant meat. I glanced at Wen Xiaodian and saw she had completely abandoned her image, devouring the braised pork with gusto. She was huffing to cool the hot sauce so she wouldn't burn her tongue, looking truly satisfied. Clearly, she hadn't noticed the changes in her body yet, which made sense. The effects of eating mutant meat are very slow. It takes a long time to accumulate before becoming noticeable. In the apocalypse, powerful mutant beasts aren't easy to hunt. Most people struggle just to stay full. Mutant meat is a luxury with no practical value to them. I realized I was staring at her, and when Xiaodian immediately blushed in embarrassment, likely feeling she was being unladylike. Since I had saved her life, she naturally cared about her image around me. She delicately changed her eating style, no longer taking large bites, but nibbling instead. I found it amusing. This girl could be quite cute sometimes. I asked her if she was familiar with the roads in this area. She wiped her mouth and nodded, saying she knew them well. I told her I needed to go somewhere and needed her to lead the way. She agreed without hesitation. After the battle with the boar, the base vehicle was heavily damaged. That was my biggest concern. I had to repair it as soon as possible. Repairing the vehicle required a massive amount of resources: 1,200 liters of gasoline, 200 kilograms of steel, 100 kilograms of copper, 30 kilograms of high-polymer organic plastic, and 200 kilowatt-hours of electricity. I had to collect it all. The upgrade materials were simpler. Just 100 kilograms of iron would do. I sighed as I looked at the list. Whether before or after the apocalypse, maintaining a good vehicle is never cheap. I drove the base vehicle, towing the small truck full of boar meat behind me, swaying along the bumpy country road. Towing is a difficult skill. Normally, the towed vehicle needs a driver to maintain distance. They have to brake on downhill slopes to avoid a rear-end collision, but braking too hard can snap the tow rope. I didn't have that luxury. Wen Xiaodian didn't know how to drive, and I wasn't exactly a professional myself, so I just winged it. With no one braking the truck, I didn't have to worry about the rope snapping. As for rear-end collisions, let it hit. Every time we hit a pothole, a loud bang echoed as the vehicles jolted violently. The 5 or 6 tons of boar meat plus the truck meant every impact was heavy. But I didn't care. The base vehicle survived a boar's charge. It could handle an old truck. The damage level stayed steady at 3.5. The small truck got the worst of it. Its front end was completely mangled, and the engine was likely shot. But as long as the 6 wheels were rolling and the frame held together, it was enough. Towing this dead weight drained fuel much faster, and I only had 20 liters left to start with. Along the way, I didn't pass up a single car. This remote area hadn't been picked clean by the military or refugees yet, so most abandoned cars still had gas. Just the few cars at the first shop gave me 200 liters. Every time I saw a car, I stopped, pried open the gas cap with a crowbar, and used a rubber hose to siphon the gas. I sucked on the hose until my mouth felt tight, and the taste of gasoline flooding my mouth was disgusting. Trucks were easy. I could get 70 or 80 liters if I was lucky. Cars were much more work. The tanks were low, and I'd struggle for half a day just to get 20 or 30 liters. Finally, after flipping through countless cars, I filled 6 large fuel drums. I felt more tired than when I was butchering the boar. This is definitely a one-time thing. If I have to do it again, I don't think I'll make it. Following Wen Xiaodian's directions, I stopped at a large hardware store. There, I found a diesel generator and a large drum of diesel. This hardware store was a literal treasure trove. I quickly gathered a pile of tools, hammers, files, electric drills. Anything useful was loaded onto the base vehicle and the truck behind it, to the point where even the mangled cabin of the truck was stuffed full. The space was so cramped that I had to admit upgrading the base vehicle storage had become an urgent need. I sighed inwardly. Everything needs mutant crystals to upgrade, and that one boar almost killed me. Finding more won't be easy. On the road, I encountered a few wandering zombies. Even though the base vehicle was damaged and the instant acceleration system was glitching, crushing a few ordinary zombies was no problem. And so, after a grueling day of crawling along, I finally reached my destination. Before me stood a 3-story building with faded black paint, sitting in the middle of a lot spanning thousands of square meters. It was surrounded by high concrete walls topped with broken glass shards to prevent climbing. The main gate was 6 or 7 meters wide, made of thick steel with sharp spikes on top. It looked quite secure, despite some signs of wear. In this desolate countryside, a large yard with a steel gate and a 3-story building looked quite imposing. After the apocalypse, the place was empty. The sign in front of the gate hung crookedly, creaking in the wind. I clearly read the 7 large characters on it. Fuwang Scrap Metal Recycling Station. Below that, it listed various materials they purchased. According to Wen Xiaodian, this was the largest scrap yard in the area, even registered as a company with a name that sounded both rustic and fancy. But it proved its scale, and that's why I chose it. I stopped the base vehicle and hit the release button for the tow hitch, leaving the small truck outside. Not knowing the situation inside, I didn't want to bring a burden if I had to fight. The main gate was slightly ajar, so I floored it and burst into the yard. The vast lot was filled with all sorts of recyclable resources. Next to them was a forklift. I honked the horn repeatedly, the piercing sound echoing throughout the area. Zombies are attracted to noise. There were almost no residents around here, so I wasn't worried about drawing too many. Luring them into the open yard made them easier to handle. Sure enough, a dozen zombies soon stumbled out of the dark building, charging madly at the base vehicle. No mutant beasts appeared, and I breathed a sigh of relief. If one had, I would have had to flee immediately, leaving the truck full of meat as a distraction. Even with the instant acceleration broken, the base vehicle could still speed up slowly. On a good road, it could hit 150 kilometers per hour, enough to outrun most common mutant beasts. I stepped on the gas. Loud crashes rang out as the dozen zombies were sent flying like bowling pins. Some were crushed against the scrap piles. I drove back and forth a few times to make sure they were dead, then honked for another 5 minutes to confirm no others were coming. Only then did I feel safe enough to step out. I told Wen Xiaodian to wait in the guard post near the gate. If she was tired, she could rest in the building. The inside should be safe by now. When she asked what I was doing, I simply said I was fixing the car. I didn't want her to see the process of repairing and upgrading the base vehicle, so I intentionally set it up this way. Wen Xiaodian was a bit surprised, probably thinking about how I turned an old bus into this powerful vehicle. Since I had collected all those tools, she didn't suspect anything. I told her to grab some food and not go hungry, and to call my name if anything happened. Then, I drove the base vehicle into a warehouse about 100 square meters large and began my work. This scrapyard really had everything. Anything that caught my eye, I brought into the warehouse. Moving a few hundred kilograms of iron, steel, and copper was much easier than siphoning gas or butchering a 10-ton boar. I decided to upgrade the fuel tank first, then proceed with the overall repairs. I initially looked at some construction scaffolding, but they were covered in cement residue, so I passed. There was plenty of old scrap metal, but much of it was rusted. However, I found many machine parts made of high-quality steel. They just needed the grease cleaned off. Copper was harder to find. The few copper pots I found weren't enough. But when I pried open a storage locker, I was stunned to find a lot of brand new construction materials. Dark blue steel bars, aluminum, copper wiring, cast copper pipes, PPR, and PVC pipes. All high-quality stuff, not scrap at all. After a moment, I realized someone must have been siphoning materials from a construction site to sell here, with the scrap yard acting as a middleman. For me, this was great news. Why use junk when I have the good stuff? I was as excited as a busy squirrel, constantly moving materials back to my nest. This base vehicle wouldn't just be a combat unit. It would be my safest home. Once the materials were ready, the seed began scanning and initiating the modification. First was the fuel tank upgrade. Then, the diesel generator roared to life. I connected the power source and officially started the repairs. Time flew from sunrise to sunset. When I came to, the entire modification process was complete. The base vehicle looked practically brand new. From the outside, the fuel tank looked the same. But inside, it had been expanded by 10 cubic meters, enough to hold plenty of gas. From now on, I wouldn't have to worry about fuel. Fuel tank upgrade complete. Capacity, 10 cubic meters. Equipped with an automatic fuel intake system. The owner can issue intake commands through the seat. A soft beep sounded, and immediately, the internal structure diagram of the new fuel tank appeared before my eyes. I quickly realized that not only was the capacity expanded, but the engine's fuel injectors, fuel lines, and air intake had all been upgraded in sync. The previous small tank couldn't handle the base vehicle's high fuel consumption, but that worry was gone now. With the new tank, the high-power engine could operate much more stably. The automatic fuel intake system especially thrilled me. I'd never have to struggle with a siphon hose again. As soon as the upgrade finished, I couldn't resist testing it. I brought over a drum with a bit of oil left, placed it near the fuel cap, and used my mind to command the seed to take in the fuel. Without pressing a button, a soft click sounded, and the fuel cap opened automatically as a metal tube extended from within. The tube was made of an unknown material, flexible and smooth as it changed directions. At the end was a clamp that could open and close, along with a glowing device that looked like a sensor. The sensor rotated slightly, locking onto the oil drum. The metal tube shot forward, and in the blink of an eye, it sucked the drum dry. This tube doesn't just suck from drums. It can connect directly to gas station pumps. The entire operation is controlled by my thoughts. I tried commanding the tube to extend further. Testing confirmed it could reach up to 10 meters. If it hit an obstacle, the distance would decrease significantly. Still, this was more than enough to satisfy me. It meant I could refuel without even stepping out of the vehicle, much more convenient and safer. In the apocalypse, just getting out to get gas is a high-risk move, especially at city gas stations where zombies could appear at any moment. The base vehicle was fully upgraded. Now it was time to continue the search for Xiaoying. Before the apocalypse, I spent almost all my time perfecting the vehicle's modifications. As soon as I finished, the world ended. The trip to Jinling was taking much longer than expected because I had to take back roads and deal with obstacles, making me increasingly worried about Xiaoying's situation. I decided to find more gas first, fill the new tank, and then continue the journey. Thinking this, I opened the warehouse door, jumped into the base vehicle, and floored it. The warehouse doors were blasted open with a loud boom. I paused for a second, feeling that the acceleration system was running much smoother. Even without activating the instant boost, just stepping on the gas made the speed pick up noticeably. I no longer felt like I was driving an old bus. It felt like a supercar. Shifting gears and turning were incredibly fluid. The large fuel tank completely freed the base vehicle from its previous limitations. Of course, the trade-off was increased fuel consumption. Even in eco mode, it gulped 35 liters per 100 kilometers. It sounds terrifying, but compared to the base vehicle's combat performance, this was still very efficient. That's assuming I don't activate the ramming mode or the air cannon. Right now, I was driving a gas-guzzling beast, but so be it. Survival power is what matters most. As long as I find a gas station that hasn't been looted, one full tank can take me nearly 30,000 kilometers, 3/4 of the way around the Earth's equator. A big tank is truly powerful. I honked the horn repeatedly in front of the small black building. Before long, when Xiaodian ran out. Her hair was a bit messy, and her eyes were sleepy. She had clearly just dozed off. Seeing me, she smiled sheepishly, but her gaze quickly landed on the base vehicle. The front end, which had been heavily mangled by the mutant boar's head, was now perfectly repaired. It looked no different from the original. This level of craftsmanship left her stunned, as bodywork is never simple, let alone the windshield that had been half shattered and was now whole again. To her, it was unbelievable. Even a professional mechanic couldn't have done it this quickly. I called her into the vehicle, and she stepped inside, still in a daze. She had expected some patchwork job, but it was restored to mint condition. She stared at the windshield until she couldn't help but ask. I coughed and made up an excuse about having a spare windshield in the storage compartment. When Xiaodian's eyes widened in surprise. Though she found it odd, she couldn't possibly imagine the vehicle had self-repair technology, so she accepted the answer. She gave me directions, saying her hometown was just ahead and there was a gas station there. The road I had traveled was all poor villages and narrow paths, so naturally, there were no gas stations. Now, I was finally approaching the first one since the tank upgrade. My spirits lifted. Gas stations on the highways had long been seized by the military. Fuel is a strategic resource in the apocalypse. But this small town had poor access and many zombies. I bet the military hadn't taken it over yet. This station had potential. After unlocking several fuel-heavy features of the base vehicle, refueling had become the most urgent task. The village road was straight, just wide enough for 2 lanes. Both sides were lined with ancient locust trees that had stood for decades, their trunks massive and branches sturdy. Every summer, the white locust flowers would bloom, and beekeepers from all over would come to harvest honey, selling it right by the road. Sadly, now that the apocalypse had hit, that scene was gone forever. By the roadside, I saw a few old beehives left behind, rattling in the wind. Abandoned cars were scattered across the road, their occupants long gone, their fates unknown. This was the small town where Xiaodian's family lived. The town center consisted of only 2 intersecting crossroads, so small you could practically hold it in your hand. All the shops, restaurants, the rural credit union, and other services were clustered around these 2 intersections. The screech of brakes echoed as I stopped at an intersection. But immediately after, a heavy thud rang out. The small truck behind us slammed into the back of the bus again, shaking the entire frame. Xiaodian was jolted and looked back worriedly. Along the way, the truck had rear-ended the bus countless times. She couldn't help but fear these constant impacts would cause serious damage. I sat in the driver's seat, my eyes quickly scanning the surroundings. Next to the intersection was a noodle shop. Cars were parked haphazardly on the street, one of which had crashed straight into a lamp post, its front end caved in. The windshield was shattered, stained with dark, dried blood. It was unclear if the person inside died in the accident or was dragged out by zombies. My house is in the alley ahead, about 200 meters away. Xiaodian spoke softly, her voice full of anxiety. The closer she got to home, the faster her heart raced. She had barely slept last night. Every time she drifted into a nightmare, she saw her family being torn apart by zombies or turning into the walking dead themselves. Seeing the desolation of her hometown now, her fear grew heavier. She almost felt afraid to move forward. But home was just a short distance away. No matter how scared she was, she had to face it. I didn't start the car immediately, nor did I get out. I just gripped the steering wheel, my gaze darkening as if I were deep in thought. Xiaodian became even more uneasy and hurriedly asked what was wrong. I shook my head slightly and said this town felt very off. She was stunned. Before she could process it, I continued. It's too quiet. A small town like this should have at least 30 or 40,000 people. The center should be swarming with thousands of zombies, yet there are only a few scattered in the distance. Normally, even if this commercial area wasn't packed, there should be a massive number of them. Driving through should have been a bloodbath, and we'd have to watch out for mutant beasts. But the current situation was unnervingly calm, giving me a bad feeling. Hearing this, Xiaodian realized it too. Not only were there few zombies, but the roads weren't as congested as expected. When the apocalypse hit, there should have been massive pileups. But most cars were parked neatly by the curb. A few were overturned in the middle of the road, but there was plenty of space to drive around. A spark of hope lit up in her eyes. She thought maybe the military had cleared the area. If so, her family might be safe. But I just shook my head, saying that was unlikely. The military has to prioritize big cities. They wouldn't have the resources to look after a remote little town like this. The light in her eyes dimmed instantly. Though she didn't want to believe it, she knew I was right. I told her we'd find out once we went inside, then started the car. I drove forward slowly, observing carefully. The zombies around were still far away. The bus moved quietly, not making much noise, so it didn't draw their attention. The bus slowly ventured deeper into the town like a silent intruder, keeping a low profile. But I had no idea that at that moment, the base vehicle was already in someone's binoculars. "Brother Zhang, someone's here," a scrawny young man with dark skin said with a grin. He looked like a monkey and sounded very interested. "Maybe we can score something." The man called Brother Zhang was a burly fellow in a tight tank top, his muscles bulging like a bodybuilder's. He looked through the binoculars and saw a beat-up bus towing an even more pathetic truck. The front was mangled, the paint was peeling. It looked like a pile of scrap metal. Brother Zhang frowned and cursed, saying he wouldn't take a vehicle like that even for free. It clearly crawled out of some hole, probably dreaming of finding the military. The scrawny guy immediately flattered him, saying Boss Wu ordered them to find gas and food. A vehicle coming from outside town must have supplies. Who knows? Maybe they have some local specialties. Meat is meat. Plus, there might be a pretty girl inside. He grinned suggestively. Brother Zhang thought for a few seconds, then hopped onto a motorcycle and waved his hand. The scrawny guy scrambled onto the back seat, a steel bar slung over his shoulder. Brother Zhang turned and shouted for the rest of the boys to follow. The roar of engines erupted as 7 or 8 motorcycles, each carrying 2 or 3 people, formed a ragtag biker gang and sped toward my bus. The base vehicle rolled slowly. When Xiaodian was giving directions, saying to turn left ahead and go a bit further. But suddenly, I yanked the steering wheel hard. The bus, which had been crawling like a snail, made a sharp, sudden turn. When Xiaodian screamed reflexively, she was thrown to the side, but thanks to her seatbelt, she was only startled, not hurt. Almost at the same time, a biker who had just lunged out of an alley right next to the bus froze. He had intended to smash the side window, but he didn't expect me to react so fast. The sudden turn made him lose his balance, and he nearly wiped out. The roar of engines intensified around us. When Xiaodian looked out and saw 7 or 8 motorcycles swarming from the side alleys. They surrounded our vehicle. The riders held iron pipes and axes, their eyes full of malice. The biker who almost fell sped up to the front, cursing and yelling at me to stop. When Xiaodian looked at me nervously, these people clearly weren't friendly. Meeting survivors should have been a relief, but now it only terrified her. I just watched coldly. There was no way I was stopping for people with bad intentions. Seeing me ignore him, the guy cursed and sped back to tell Brother Zhang I wouldn't stop. The scrawny guy behind Zhang immediately asked if there was a girl. When he heard there was one, he chuckled. He rubbed his hands and told Zhang to box us in. Towing that piece of junk, we wouldn't get far. He even mentioned taking the supplies and the woman with a lewd grin. Brother Zhang thought for a moment, then nodded. He ordered them to close in and smash the windows. The bikes accelerated, flanking the bus. One bike pulled up right next to the window. Through the glass, I saw 3 thugs grinning wickedly at Wen Xiaodian before slamming an iron bar against it. A loud bang echoed. Wen Xiaodian shrieked and ducked, but I calmly told her not to be afraid. How could bulletproof glass be broken by a few iron bars? Compared to the mutant boar's charge, their strength was negligible. The 2 thugs with the bars immediately felt the sting. The bars bounced back, one guy lost his grip, and both clutched their aching arms. I slowly pressed the gas, starting to accelerate. When Xiaodian, panicked, asked who they were, I replied curtly, "Bandits." Then I added that they were likely kidnappers too. She froze, instinctively clutching her collar. The way they looked at her made that statement even more terrifying. I intended to just outrun them, but they kept provoking me. The bandits wouldn't let up, and several bikes closed in again. One thug stood up on the back seat, raising an axe with a cruel smile as he looked into the cabin. The seed kept flashing warnings. I frowned and suddenly swerved, the bus slamming into that motorcycle. The bike and its riders were sent tumbling. The young man hit the ground screaming in agony. Brother Zhang was stunned. He didn't expect such a difficult driver. But in his eyes, good driving didn't change the fact that it was just a crappy bus. He roared, ordering everyone to close in and pop my tires. The scrawny guy immediately pulled out a bag of spikes to scatter on the road. The other bikes pressed in, but right then, I made a sharp turn and pulled a U-turn. My gaze turned cold. I had intended to just escape, but that axe swing was a clear attempt to kill. Since it had come to this, I didn't need to hold back. Seeing the bus suddenly turn around, Brother Zhang didn't even have time to process it before his heart hammered against his ribs. The bus was accelerating, charging straight at him. A biker in front, who was just shouting and waving a pipe, was sent flying into the air. The bus didn't slow down, it kept charging. Another biker desperately swerved to avoid it, but the seemingly clunky vehicle turned with terrifying agility. It caught up and, with another crash, slammed the bike and rider into a roadside shop. The sound of the impact and the screams left the others terrified and dazed. Ramming two bikes in a row, this driver was ruthless. The bus backed out and aimed straight for Brother Zhang's bike. His heart raced. He felt like he was being hunted by a wild beast. The familiar old bus front now looked like cold eyes locked onto him, making him tremble. Damn it, this bus is insane. Brother Zhang was about to think of a way to deal with it when he saw the bus accelerate and charge. His mind went blank, and he barely managed to yank his handlebars to flee into a side alley. The screech of brakes echoed behind him. Brother Zhang looked back and saw the front of the bus stop right behind him. Even now, he couldn't believe what had just happened. The scrawny guy standing next to him hadn't recovered either, his throat dry as he asked what to do. Brother Zhang cursed, his heart still pounding. He had no idea. A clunky bus with such terrifying performance. The windshield was hit twice and didn't even crack. It was completely beyond his understanding. A total of 3 motorcycles had been knocked down. The riders were either dead on the spot or so badly injured they had no chance of survival. If Boss Wu found out about this, he didn't know how he'd explain it. Seeing the remaining bandits had all ducked into alleys, I stepped on the brakes. When Xiaodian still hadn't recovered. When I hit the first motorcycle, she had squeezed her eyes shut. She didn't see what happened next, but the sounds alone were enough to guess. Those who were hit certainly didn't have a good end. But if I hadn't done it, falling into the hands of these bandits would have been an even worse fate for us. She turned to look at me and saw me take 2 deep breaths to calm down before I looked back at her. I told her those guys wouldn't be back for a while, then asked again where her house was. My memory isn't bad, but navigating these unfamiliar residential areas wasn't my forte. Under Wen Xiaodian's guidance, I drove the base vehicle to a house and stopped at the gate. The yard wall wasn't high. Inside was a small yard with flowers and plants. In the corner was a garden patch with gray perforated bricks where green onions grew vibrantly. The concrete base near the wall was covered in green moss and weeds from long-standing water. The 2-story house was low, with a 90s style, but the old windows were wiped very clean. When Xiaodian looked at the house, her voice tight as she said it was hers. She twisted her fingers, bit her lip, and then bolted from the passenger seat to get out. I called her back and honked the horn twice. The sound was clear, but not piercing. I watched through the windshield and glanced around. No zombies appeared from the neighboring houses. The honking made Wen Xiaodian stare at the security door, afraid it would rattle or make some noise. I honked a few more times. Still nothing. I signaled to her that it was safe for now and she could get out. Wen Xiaodian nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped into the yard. I watched from the vehicle and saw her standing at the door. She took out her keys, but her hands were shaking so much it took her a long time to open it. I understood exactly how she felt. If it weren't for safety, I would have gone with her. But in such a strange town, surrounded by houses yet seeing almost no zombies, it was better for me to stay in the vehicle just in case. I noticed dried bloodstains on the doors and windows of some nearby houses. Before long, Wen Xiaodian came back out, looking dazed as she walked toward the vehicle. I immediately asked about the situation. Earlier, I only heard her calling for her family, followed by silence. Looking at her face, I knew it wasn't good. She said no one was home. The place was ransacked, trash was everywhere, the fridge was wide open, and the food was gone. She tried to cling to a sliver of hope, saying maybe they managed to escape in time. I looked at the door and said nothing, but in my heart, I felt that was unlikely. If they were fleeing in a hurry, no one would have locked the door so carefully. The windows were closed, and the curtains were drawn neatly. Besides, taking food makes sense, but there's no reason to toss the house into such a mess. I was still thinking when I saw Wen Xiaodian completely lose it. She stood there, not knowing what to do next. When she decided to come back, she must have considered this possibility, but now that it was real, she didn't know how to face it. Her family was gone, leaving no note or any news. I suddenly called her name and asked if there was anything scattered on the sofa. She looked surprised and said there was a blanket and some random things. I asked what kind of trash was on the floor. She didn't get my point and just said her family hadn't left anything for her. I explained, it wasn't left for her, it was a sign. There are very few zombies in this area. The house was locked with curtains drawn. It's very likely someone was still living here. There's a blanket on the sofa, so someone might have slept there. If there's fresh trash, the chance is even higher. I only shared this theory after careful consideration because I didn't want to give her false hope. After hearing this, Wen Xiaodian's eyes widened. I told her she could go back in and check if that was the case. Before I could even finish, she bolted out of the vehicle, much faster than before, a spark of hope returning to her eyes. After Wen Xiaodian checked again and again, I knew my hunch was right. Following my suggestions, she quickly found a series of signs that someone had been living in the house. The water tank in the bathroom had been used. There was a trash bag with food scraps, and even many footprints on the floor. My observation skills left Wen Xiaodian in total awe. I didn't even need to step out of the vehicle. Just hearing her description was enough to analyze such important details. What should we do now? Knowing her family might be very close, Wen Xiaodian couldn't hide her emotion. Normally, she was quite decisive. Otherwise, she wouldn't have insisted I bring her back. But right now, her mind was a mess. Moreover, throughout the journey, almost every right decision for our safety had come from me. So, even knowing her family might be nearby, she instinctively asked for my opinion. We wait here. I looked around. This area is safe for now. I lowered the driver's seat, leaned back, and closed my eyes to rest. I had been driving nonstop. Although I rested at night, the fatigue was unavoidable. Wen Xiaodian certainly couldn't sleep, so she took over the watch. Honestly, even without a guard, there wasn't much danger. As long as the doors were locked, the base vehicle was like a mobile fortress. Ordinary zombies, or even mutant beasts couldn't destroy or flip it in an instant. I had plenty of time to react. I hadn't been lying down long before my breathing evened out. Wen Xiaodian looked at me, thinking I had actually fallen asleep. In her eyes, I seemed fearless, always calmly following the plan no matter the situation. But I know humans can't be entirely without fear. We just get good at hiding it. She kept staring at the surroundings, her heart filled with both hope and worry, feeling like her family could appear from a corner at any moment. Over an hour later, I suddenly opened my eyes and sat up. The seat returned to its normal position. Someone's coming. Footsteps echoed from the alley on the left. Since the apocalypse, I've become a very light sleeper. I was actually awake earlier. I was just resting my eyes. When my eyes are closed, my hearing becomes even sharper. Yes, Wen Xiaodian tensed up too. She heard the noise as well. She bit her lip, her heart pounding, her eyes fixed on the alley. I placed my hands on the wheel, my gaze alert. Those bikers from earlier might have come back. This place really isn't peaceful. The footsteps grew closer, sounding quite chaotic. Clearly more than one or two people. Before long, more than a dozen men and women quickly emerged from the alley. They walked while cautiously scanning their surroundings. Some carried bags, others held iron bars as weapons. The group had both old and young, looking like ordinary people. Seeing them, Wen Xiaodian immediately rushed to the window, her eyes scanning every face. Initially, there was only worry and disappointment. She didn't see anyone. But then she suddenly leaned forward, her eyes wide. Lulu. She waved her hands excitedly. I looked over and saw a girl who looked quite like Wen Xiaodian but younger, with a ponytail. Her face was smeared with mud, and she wore a tattered gray field jacket and a canvas backpack. She held an iron bar, looking incredibly exhausted. Wen Xiaodian kept waving behind the glass, forgetting they couldn't see her from outside. The group approached, and when they saw the vehicle, they all froze. After a moment of shock, their eyes showed fear, defensiveness, and doubt. The ponytail girl quickly took a bag out of her backpack and stuffed it into her oversized jacket. The others didn't stop her. Then, the group cautiously approached the bus. Wen Xiaodian, I called out. She snapped out of it and ran to the door, excitedly saying, Jiang, I see my sister. That's good, I replied, still sitting in the driver's seat watching through the window. I saw her run off the bus, go around the front, and head toward the back. The group looked at the bus with suspicion. Just then, they saw a joyful young woman appear from behind the vehicle. Everyone was startled, but before they could react, Wen Lu rushed forward and hugged Wen Xiaodian tightly. The two sisters sobbed uncontrollably. Lulu, Wen Xiaodian's eyes were red. Sis, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Wen Lu couldn't hold back her tears either. The other survivors looked at each other, all of them bewildered. After crying for a while, Wen Lu wiped her tears and turned to the group. This is my sister. Someone asked in surprise, your sister? Didn't you say she was at Jiangbei University? The distance from Jiangbei to here in the apocalypse is practically impossible for an ordinary person to cross. Not seeing each other again would have been the most normal thing. Wen Lu stared at her sister's face for a moment and then laughed. How did you get back? I thought I'd never see you again in this life. Wen Xiaodian happily pointed to the bus behind her. It was Jiang. He drove me all the way from Jiangbei. Drove? In that vehicle? Not just Wen Lu, but the others also looked at the old bus and the mangled truck behind it with disbelief. A vehicle like that could make it from Jiangbei? Who is this Jiang? Wen Xiaodian pulled Wen Lu to the front of the vehicle. The others curiously gathered around too. More than a dozen pairs of eyes looked through the windshield at me sitting in the driver's seat. I raised my hand and waved at them. Even I felt the gesture was awkward because even though they hadn't said anything, I could read one sentence clearly in their eyes. Are you kidding us? I stayed in the vehicle, one hand scrolling through a map from this town to Jinling on my tablet. The other hand rested lightly on the wheel. Occasionally, I turned my head to look at the one family's two-story house. Wen Xiaodian had been inside for over an hour. The two sisters were in a room on the second floor. As I looked toward the house, the curtain flickered. Wen Lu's face appeared briefly behind the curtain. She glanced at my bus and then quickly pulled back. I paused for a second, then indifferently shrugged and went back to my map, acting as if I hadn't seen anything. Did he really kill a mutant boar? Wen Lu let go of the curtain, her voice still full of disbelief. Was that boar really that terrifying? Of course. Everything I told you is true, Wen Xiaodian replied, her voice still thick with emotion. Earlier, Wen Lu had told her that their parents had passed away. Conditions were so primitive they could only give them a makeshift burial. Throughout the journey with me, Wen Xiaodian had grown accustomed to how fragile life and death were, to the point where a proper burial was a rare comfort, as so many died without even a body left behind. Even knowing that, the pain was irrepressible. The two sisters cried for over an hour before finally managing to calm down. Then, Wen Lu began asking for details about her sister's journey. In the girl's eyes, I looked about the same age as Wen Xiaodian, likely just another college student. Nothing particularly strong about me. Yet, the two of them had driven an old bus and safely made it from Jiangbei to here. The facts were right there, but it sounded impossible no matter how she heard it. When she heard Wen Xiaodian describe escaping the zombie horde and then ramming the mutant boar to death, Wen Lu was even more stunned. Regardless, we really have to thank him, Wen Lu said. Yeah, Wen Xiaodian nodded. She glanced out the window for a moment. What she told her sister was only part of it. There were some things about me and the bus she kept to herself, like butchering the boar and storing it in the vehicle. The experience with the bikers earlier had made her much more wary of strangers. Right, Lulu, who are those people downstairs? Wen Xiaodian asked. After learning her identity, those survivors were all curious, constantly looking at her and the bus. Though she didn't think her sister was involved with the bikers, she couldn't help but wonder about these people's identities. They're just town residents. Sis, your memory is really shot. You didn't even recognize Auntie Lee's daughter from next door? Wen Lu said. Then she explained that after the apocalypse, they gradually gathered together. They went out for food every 3 days and took turns guarding at night. By now, everyone was living like they were in a primitive society, working together and sharing what they found. It's very dangerous, isn't it? Wen Xiaodian worried. In her memory, her sister was just a middle schooler who used to cry at the sight of a cockroach. Now she had to go out and scavenge for food. But she also understood that to survive, Everyone had to take care of themselves and carry their share of the burden. It's okay. It used to be more dangerous. Now there are fewer zombies. It's just those people who are annoying. When we saw the bus, we thought they had come back. When Lu said, "Those people?" When Xiaodian was startled, "Do you mean the ones on motorcycles? You met them? Did they do anything to you?" When Lu asked worriedly, "Nothing serious." When Xiaodian recounted what happened, hearing about me ramming the bikers, when Lu couldn't help but gasp, "Oh my God, but I still haven't said why they came to our house," when Xiaodian noted. The way when Lu used the word again clearly showed those people had been here before. Thinking of their nastiness, she couldn't help but worry for her sister. They come to collect protection money. When Lu frowned, her face full of disgust. They have a leader who once lured the zombies away, so he forces survivors like us to pay up. At first, we thought paying a little for a safer environment was okay, but they're too cruel. They're really driving us to our deaths. Saying that, she pulled a dirty hat and scarf from under the bed. They also forced some girls to be their girlfriends. I had no choice but to stop changing my clothes. Every time they come, I put these on. Thinking of a girl who used to love being clean having to do this, when Xiaodian was both heartbroken and furious. There's nothing else we can do, when Lu sighed helplessly. Ordinary people like them really have no choice. Let's not talk about it. It's good enough just to be alive. Have you eaten? When Lu asked. When they went downstairs, when Xiaodian saw the survivors working quietly. Some were checking weapons, others were organizing food. Most of the food from the backpacks was just snacks, the packaging covered in dust. Many bags were crushed, some even stained with blood. A girl wearing rubber gloves was carefully washing each item in a small bowl. Little Xiaodian. The girl looked up and smiled. That was Auntie Li's daughter whom when Lu mentioned. It wasn't surprising when Xiaodian didn't recognize her at first. Her face and hair were filthy, clearly neglected for a long time. Only by looking like this could she avoid the bikers' attention. "We found so little food today," a middle-aged man sighed while organizing. "It's not like we found nothing," an old man about 60 said. "We found half a bag of rice in a house today. That's very precious. But we have to hand over half. The rest will only last a few meals," the middle-aged man grimaced. "A few hot meals are better than nothing," the old man smiled. Then he turned to Xiaodian. "Lulu's sister is back. It's a big occasion. Let's cook rice today." "No need." When Xiaodian waved her hands hurriedly. "Call that young man in to eat with us too." "I'll go wash the rice now," the old man said and turned away. "I'll go call him." When Lu said excitedly, ignoring when Xiaodian's protests. She ran straight out the door toward the bus. After hearing so much from her sister, she was curious about me to the extreme. Knock, knock. When Lu tapped twice on the vehicle door, curiously peering inside. The windows and door were tinted. Even with her face pressed against the glass, she couldn't see clearly from the outside. Hearing when Xiaodian's description, she was incredibly curious about this vehicle. From the outside, it just looked like an old inner-city bus. It was hard to believe it was a mobile home inside. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she could hardly imagine it. Hearing the knock, I turned my head and pressed the button to open the door. When Lu immediately stepped onto the bus, her eyes scanning the interior. She hadn't even finished her greeting before she let out a gasp of wonder. The interior was neatly and luxuriously arranged. The area wasn't large, but it had every amenity, all arranged very logically without feeling cramped. With just one look, she was completely captivated. After the apocalypse, even though she stayed in her own home, when Lu's living conditions were far worse than before. No water, no power, lack of food. Even using the bathroom became a challenge she had to force herself to adapt to. Compared to all that, the space inside this vehicle was like another world. She stood at the door, staring for a long time. It wasn't just the comfort that overwhelmed her, but her sister's story that I was a car enthusiast who likely modified everything here by hand, including the repairs. Looking closely, she found almost no signs of damage. It was completely different from what when Xiaodian had said about shattered glass and a mangled front. "Are you looking for me?" I spoke up, pulling her back to reality. When Lu jumped, then apologized with a smile, saying the vehicle was so amazing she got lost in it. I just replied with a thank you. Her personality was clearly more bubbly than her sister's, but their smiles were the same, very sincere. When Lu quickly stated her purpose, she came to invite me down for a meal. They were lucky enough to find half a bag of rice today, and could make fried rice as a thank you for bringing her sister home safely. To them, fried rice was a very rare meal. After the food in their homes and neighbors' houses ran out, they had gone hungry for several days. The power outage meant most food had spoiled. What was left was scarce and dangerous to find, not to mention the supermarkets had been picked clean by the bikers. This half bag of rice was truly precious. When Lu believed that on the road, when Xiaodian and I must have had it even harder than them, hungry and constantly worried. However, I shook my head and declined. When Lu was surprised and hurriedly said it was just a meal, nothing compared to me bringing her sister back. I still smiled and made it clear I wasn't interested. Seeing their situation, I couldn't bear to eat their meager food. Besides, after eating mutant meat, I wasn't exactly craving fried rice. More importantly, I maintained a necessary caution with strange survivors. My vehicle was full of food and fuel, not to mention the truck behind it full of fresh meat. In the apocalypse, faced with such temptation, no one can be sure people won't change. When Lu invited me a few more times, but seeing my persistence, she gave up. As she prepared to leave, she suddenly remembered something, turned back, took an item hidden in her jacket, and shoved it into my hand, not letting me refuse. It was just a bag of crushed cookies, but it was still warm. I saw her puff out her cheeks as if she'd get upset if I refused again, so I couldn't help but laugh and accept it. Even though I didn't lack food, I carefully set the cookies aside. To her, this was clearly very precious. I asked about their food situation. When Lu shook her head, saying they had enough to survive, but the bikers were like vampires, constantly bleeding them dry. She mentioned the gang I had met, saying they were all henchmen of a very powerful leader, not an ordinary man, who had killed those who dared to resist him. He was the one who lured most of the zombies to the outskirts, making this town much emptier. I listened with growing interest because luring a massive horde of zombies isn't something an ordinary person can do. I had noticed the town was too quiet earlier, now I knew why. As we spoke, when Lu worriedly mentioned that the bikers would come again today to collect food. If they saw my bus, it could cause trouble. I just hummed in response. I understood their helplessness, hating the bandits yet relying on them to keep the zombies away. Without them, the whole town might have been swallowed by zombies long ago. I thought about taking the sisters away, but I didn't even know what lay ahead or what Jinling was like. I wasn't sure if I could protect them, so I didn't dare make any promises. Finally, I asked for the location of the gas station in town. I didn't just come here to bring Wen Xiaodian back, I also needed to refuel. It's very likely the gas in big cities has been seized by the military. This town might be my last chance before heading to Jinling. Otherwise, I'd have to scavenge gas from abandoned cars, which is incredibly tedious. When Lu looked troubled and said the gas station probably wasn't usable anymore, but there were still many abandoned cars on the road. If I was lucky, I could siphon enough to get by. I frowned slightly. I can't go to the gas station. After when Lu explained, I understood the reason. The leader of the biker gang had seized almost all the town's resources, including fuel. They mostly moved by motorcycle, so gas was vital to them. He even set up his headquarters right near the gas station. When Lu advised me absolutely not to approach that area, all the survivors in town had been robbed by them. The unlucky ones, or those who resisted, were long dead. Their power was so great that no one dared to oppose them. Groups like hers could only barely exist under that control, and no one ever dared to go near the gas station. As for me, I hadn't just resisted, I had killed their people. Obviously, I was already on their radar. I pondered for a moment and then asked for the leader's name. When Lu said she only knew him as Boss Wu, she looked at me, seemingly trying to guess what I was thinking, but I didn't show any reaction. She continued, saying if I really needed gas, I could still siphon it from the tanks of some small cars. The town isn't big, and there aren't many cars. The big trucks were drained long ago, but they hadn't bothered with the small cars yet, so some might be left. It's just very time-consuming. If I wanted to fill a whole tank, it might take 3 or 4 days. Hearing that, I just shook my head inwardly. 100 liters is nothing compared to the base vehicle's capacity. That wouldn't be enough at all. Just then, the sound of engines suddenly erupted. When Lu turned pale and whispered that they were here, I turned my head to look. Several motorcycles had appeared at the end of the street. I didn't flinch. I placed my hand on the control panel, the performance specs of the base vehicle clear in my mind. The vehicle was ready to start. The motorcycles quickly closed in. I observed the group. They were all unfamiliar faces. This was a different group, part of the same biker gang, but not the ones from before. I released my hand from the button, but the vehicle remained in a ready state. Seeing they didn't react specifically to the bus, when Lou breathed a sigh of relief. She whispered for me to stay in the vehicle, then quietly got down and walked quickly toward the house. The survivors inside heard the noise and hurried to the door, watching with worried faces. As they passed my vehicle, the bandits only glanced at it before moving on. The leader was a blonde youth in a leather jacket, dressed ridiculously like a street thug. I guessed Boss Wu, the one controlling this town, probably started as a biker himself. When the apocalypse hit, he gathered his old gang and built his own power, which is why these henchmen looked so much like hoodlums. Everyone out here. The blonde guy shouted in front of the gate, slamming an iron bar against the metal gate, creating a piercing crash. The survivors stepped out, trembling. When Lou quickly grabbed a handful of ash from the extinguished cooking fire, mixed it with water, and without a word, smeared it on her face. When Xiaoyan gasped, but seeing her sister's tense gaze, she immediately understood and lowered her head, afraid that being noticed would cause more trouble. Clearly, in this world, beautiful girls are prey. When the law collapses, those who were already aggressive become even more brutal and unrestrained. Hand over all the food. Don't even think about hiding it. If I find so much as a grain of rice later, I'll break every one of your legs. The guy in the leather jacket roared, his face full of delight as he savored the power of life and death. Before the apocalypse, he was a nobody. If he acted tough, he'd end up in a police station. But now he was the boss. His word was law. Even those who used to be high and mighty could only bow their heads and endure. He truly loved this chaotic world. None of the survivors dared to resist. It wasn't because they were cowards, but because they knew they didn't stand a chance. People had tried to band together and resist before. The result was Boss Wu personally showing up and killing everyone. Rumor has it the scene was horrific. Some were even dismembered, no different from being torn apart by zombies. Against someone like that, what could they do? Trembling, they handed over all their food. The old man from earlier clutched the half bag of rice he'd found today, his eyes full of lingering attachment, as if he were handing over his very life. Old man, hurry up. What are you dawdling for? You want to die? The blonde guy snapped, snatching the rice bag from the old man's hands and making him stumble. You guys go inside and search. At that command, the henchmen swarmed into the yard. Immediately, the sound of pots and pans being smashed echoed. They were like a swarm of locusts, destroying everything in their path. One thug shouted from inside that these people were cooking rice. The leather-jacketed guy immediately turned around, his cold gaze sweeping over the survivors. The old man tremblingly explained that they had previously agreed to split the food. The response was just a spit on the ground and a contemptuous insult, saying that agreement only applied to dry rations, and there was no way they were keeping the rice. The old man begged with a shaky voice, saying his 5-year-old grandson had a fever and asking to keep a little. The blonde guy roared, asking if he dared to keep yapping. The blonde youth in the leather jacket raised his hand, and immediately the surrounding people rushed to pull the old man away, bowing their heads in apology. Seeing the crowd act so timidly, he let out a cold snort, his eyes full of disdain. Among these people, some wouldn't have even glanced at him before the apocalypse. Now, they all had to bow before him. Just then, he happened to turn his head and saw me sitting in the small bus. Earlier, he had only noticed the old vehicle frame. The side windows were dark, so he didn't know anyone was inside. But through the front windshield, he clearly saw me sitting in the cabin. Anger immediately flared up. He yelled, asking if I was deaf or dead. He was collecting goods, and I dared to just sit there? He told me to get my ass down immediately. Before the apocalypse, he was a loser, so now that he had power, he hated anyone who dared to ignore him. His petty nature, once given power, had bloated to a twisted degree. I looked at him coldly. With my personality, I had wanted to teach this fool a lesson from the start. I had only been considering leaving town and didn't want to bring trouble to the survivors because of Boss Wu. But now, I was clearly being targeted. I gripped the wheel and didn't budge. That drove the blonde guy insane. He swung his iron bar hard against the front of the vehicle. A loud bang rang out, but the bus didn't have a scratch. Instead, He screamed in pain, his arm going numb to the bone. He froze. The bus's shell should have been thin. It should have been deeply dented. But this vehicle was so hard the recoil nearly broke his arm. His rage was further ignited, and he screamed for his men to smash the vehicle, drag me out, break my legs, and search it. The henchmen immediately swarmed out, some even carrying the pot of uncooked rice. The old man looked at the rice pot with heartache. These people wouldn't even leave them that. I saw Wen-lu standing behind the bandits, her face pale. She didn't dare call out, but she kept signaling for me to run. I immediately pulled the release for the small truck behind me, shifted into reverse, yanked the wheel right, and floored it. The base vehicle began to reverse rapidly. The blonde guy jumped on his motorcycle and roared for them to chase. The biker gang revved their engines and charged like hungry wolves, closing in from several directions. Their riding skills were actually quite good. He shouted to use the spike strips, and they immediately threw homemade tire-popping devices made of welded iron nails onto the road, something even a truck would have to stop for. Seeing that, I just sneered. Reversing earlier was just to avoid hurting innocent people. Once I had backed up over 100 meters to a narrow asphalt stretch where abandoned cars lined one side, I hit the brakes, shifted to drive, and floored the gas. The engine roared like a wild beast. The base vehicle charged forward, crushing the spike strips under its tires. The crude weld shattered, and the tires were completely unharmed. The blonde guy stared in disbelief. Before he could process what was happening, the vehicle was charging straight at him. The speed was increasing, scaring the soul out of him. Switching from reverse to full acceleration in just seconds, this bus's burst speed was faster than a motorcycle. For a moment, they couldn't react. Only a bone-shaking crash was heard as the bus slammed into the blonde guy's motorcycle. A horrific scream rang out. He and the bike were sent flying, sliding dozens of meters across the pavement. The front wheel was shattered, and he lay crumpled in a pool of blood, one leg pinned under the bike, clearly broken. He screamed in agony, while I watched coldly. Being hit and thrown that far with shattered bones and nonstop bleeding meant certain death in the apocalypse. For these heartless people who caused trouble in peacetime and became even more brutal when the apocalypse hit, I didn't have a shred of pity. Once I acted, there was no turning back. The base vehicle ran at full power. I kept the gas down, turned the wheel, and rammed 2 more motorcycles. Screams of agony followed one after another. Being hit like that meant they'd be lucky to survive the next few minutes. The bikers' faces were drained of color. Their spike strips had always worked before, but now they were all crushed while my vehicle remained unscathed, like an armored tank. Finally, they didn't even care about the blonde guy and their injured comrades. They turned and fled in all directions. Faced with danger, they only cared about their own lives. No one dared to risk themselves to save another. The entire biker gang fled in panic, every man for himself, terrified by my ramming. Some ducked straight into narrow alleys where my base vehicle couldn't follow. But as soon as they entered the alleys, several dark shadows suddenly lunged out, flipping the motorcycles. Zombies. Several zombies immediately pounced on them, tearing at them frantically. Screams of terror rang out, quickly attracting more zombies from other hidden corners, leaving those unlucky few to be swallowed in despair. This town was actually only clear of zombies on the main roads. Many still lurked in residential areas and alleys. Survivors tried to stay far away from those places. Only these thugs, in their panic, rushed in and turned themselves into food. I frowned, seeing the zombies busy tearing the thugs apart, and eased off the gas, letting the base vehicle back up. I wasn't afraid of zombies, but if I let the whole horde swarm into the yard, those survivors wouldn't survive. I quietly turned the vehicle back. In the small yard, more than a dozen survivors were stunned. That seemingly old bus was powerful enough to crush spike strips and ram motorcycles without a single dent or scratch. After the shock passed, fear quickly took over. They worried that after killing so many bandits, the consequences would be horrific. Before, if they didn't hand over food or fought back, Boss Wu would personally come and kill everyone, even dismembering them. This time would surely be worse. Watching me slowly drive back, everyone's faces were pale. No one knew where this was going. The old man from before, holding the rice pot, his hands shaking, stammered to Wen-lu, asking what they should do. He was old, Death didn't matter. But he had his 5-year-old grandson. After the apocalypse, his son and daughter both died, leaving the child as his only reason to live. When Lu gritted her teeth and told Mr. Wong that since they'd already been hit, there was no avoiding it. If they had to fight, they'd find a way. Her personality was much stronger than her sister's. Having endured the bandits for so long, seeing them rammed, and seeing some eaten by zombies, she felt a sense of justice despite her fear of Boss Wu's revenge. A young man in his 20s added that in this damn era, you don't know if you'll live to see tomorrow. If they had to live under exploitation, they might as well take a stand. If he wasn't afraid of dragging everyone down, he would have cracked the blonde guy's head open himself. When death is always lurking, Boss Wu's threat seemed a bit less terrifying. Zombies weren't necessarily stronger than him. Though most people still trembled because zombies don't hunt people systematically, while Boss Wu would seek revenge to the end. I overheard those words and instinctively looked at the fair-skinned young man. He wasn't tall and looked like a scholar, but his eyes were full of resolve. I called him over and asked him to drag the blonde guy here. Then I reached out and handed a bag of chocolate candies through the window, telling him to eat. I didn't want to get off the vehicle yet. The screaming earlier might still draw zombies. On the vehicle, I could react faster. Besides, with the amount of mutant meat and dry rations I had, a bag of candy was nothing to me. But just that one bag made the eyes of the survivors around us light up. Chocolate was something they hadn't dared to dream of. Day after day, they ate only crushed cookies and cheap noodles until they were sick of it. The fair-skinned youth swallowed hard, hesitated, and then shook his head, saying he'd be more than happy to drag the blonde guy. I laughed and tossed him the bag, telling him to take it. Dragging him was dangerous, and I needed him. He finally accepted it, blushing as he thanked me under the envious gazes of the others, then immediately ran to grab the blonde guy by the back of his collar. The guy looked at him with hatred but was met with a stinging slap. The youth barked, not satisfied. He dragged him across the ground, every step a scream of pain. When he yelled too loud, he got another slap and a threat to be hung from a utility pole for zombies to eat from the feet up. 3 slaps left his mouth bleeding and his face swollen, reduced to mere whimpers. In reality, his leg was practically ruined. Even if he didn't die of infection, losing a leg in the apocalypse was a death sentence. He was full of hatred but didn't beg. Only when threatened did he realize a painful death was far worse than a quick one. I watched from the vehicle, silently praising the kid for knowing how to intimidate. It saved me some trouble. The blonde guy was dragged to the front of the vehicle, leaving a long trail of blood on the ground. He groaned as he looked up at me in the driver's seat. If this vehicle ran over him a few times, he'd be better off dead. The fair-skinned youth made a joke, but I was different. When I hit the gas, I never hesitated. I've brought the bastard here. Tell me what else you need. The fair-skinned youth said to me from outside the windshield, his tone calm, but his eyes cold. After speaking, he even gave a faint smile, glancing at the blonde guy on the ground. The meaning behind his words was crystal clear. The blonde guy gnashed his teeth in hatred. Before I showed up, would this fair-skinned brat have dared to be so arrogant? Hadn't he bowed and scraped before him every day? Initially, he hadn't even bothered to look closely at these survivors because there were no pretty girls worth noticing. When Lu and the others were filthy from head to toe, their hair matted with mud, he just glanced and moved on. Because of that, when he first saw me, he didn't realize I was a stranger. But now he understood. If I had appeared sooner, he might not have lived until today. This imposing bus was clearly from somewhere else. He was both hateful and terrified. The pain in his leg made him groan incessantly. I have a few questions. I looked down at him, my voice very slow. I ask, you answer. If I feel like you're lying or refusing to answer. I glanced at the fair-skinned youth. He immediately grinned and placed his foot directly on the blonde guy's broken leg, tilting his head. Hear that? If you want to play games, you know what happens. The blonde guy's face went pale instantly. He was furious enough to go insane, but the fear of torture won out. Finally, he gritted his teeth. Ask, who is Boss Wu? How does he lure the zombies away? Be specific, I asked directly. Now that I was completely at odds with that man, I needed to understand him before preparing my next move. Hearing me mention that name, the blonde guy laughed, a mocking sound. In his eyes, I was clearly asking because I was afraid now that I'd heard of him. If I was scared, I should have been obedient from the start. Now was too late. He said Boss Wu wasn't an ordinary man. He was even more terrifying than the zombies. With just a motorcycle, he alone lured all the zombies in the area away. He escaped safely from the midst of thousands without a scratch. As he spoke, he watched my reaction, hoping to see fear. But my face didn't change. I just listened thoughtfully. He thought I didn't understand the significance or was just faking composure. He continued, saying those who defied Boss Wu all met the same end. Boss Wu would come personally, kill everyone, and make their deaths agonizing. His face twisted with pleasure, as if just saying it would terrify me. Dismemberment, right? I replied indifferently. I've heard. That reaction left him both disappointed and confused. In his mind, Boss Wu was no longer human, but something on a completely different level. He continued to brag that even without a motorcycle, Boss Wu could escape. Zombies couldn't catch him. Human speed records were a joke to him. His speed could rival a motorcycle. That was enough. As he said these words, even knowing he had no chance to take revenge himself, he showed a strange pride, as if that power belonged to him. He desperately hoped Boss Wu would make me suffer one day. Hearing this, I began to form a picture of Boss Wu. With such extraordinary speed, he was indeed a massive threat in the post-apocalyptic world. Without much thought, I understood. This likely wasn't an ordinary human anymore, but a type of mutant. The virus had changed his body, not turning him into a zombie, but granting him abilities far beyond normal people. In this case, it was speed. Speed enough to outrun a motorcycle, enough to lure a whole horde and retreat safely. That explained why he could clear this town by himself. I asked a few more questions, but the blonde guy only repeated tales of Boss Wu's cruelty and brutality, offering no other useful information. Realizing I couldn't squeeze anything else out, I signaled the fair-skinned youth to come closer. He immediately ran over, looking both excited and alert. The blonde guy began to panic, his eyes darting around, not knowing how I would deal with him next. I sat behind the windshield, staring at him, my mind already weighing the next step. The gas station was located at the exit on the other side of town. This area had significantly fewer zombies. Along the way, I still saw a few zombie corpses hanging from balconies on both sides of the road, already starting to rot and smell. They were once human, turned into aggressive monsters with extraordinary strength and terrifying speed by the virus. Though their bodies were far from human, they still bled and would decompose after death. Seeing those hanging corpses was enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. This area was the biker gang's territory. Not only did zombies not dare approach, but even ordinary survivors could only avoid it from a distance. The gang's base was right next to the gas station, inside an apartment building. The ground floor was a repair shop with over a dozen motorcycles parked out front. Inside, several gang members sat around a wooden table covered in grease, playing cards and laughing loudly. Suddenly, the roar of an engine erupted violently. A motorcycle sped in like a madman, nearly slamming into the row of parked bikes. The card players looked up. One of them, seeing the rider jump off and run inside in a panic, stood up with a frown. "Isn't that Xiangzi? Why are you in such a rush?" He spoke while watching the figure dash past. But before he could ask more, he was shoved aside. "Get out of the way." The man stumbled and cursed angrily. "Are you rushing to your own funeral?" But Xiangzi didn't care. He just bolted toward the stairs behind the shop, racing all the way to the 4th floor. This entire building was the biker gang's living quarters. Their leader, Boss Wu, lived on the 4th floor. Previously, this place had been a shelter for several survivors, including a family. But since Boss Wu led the gang to seize the building as their base, those people had met a tragic end. They were just civilians, completely unable to resist. The men and elderly were almost all killed. The young women were violated, and even the little girls weren't spared. They escaped the zombies, but they couldn't escape other humans. The room Boss Wu occupied was the apartment of that little girl's family. Xiangzi burst into the room, gasping for air. The place was thick with cigarette smoke, beer, and food piled in the corners. Several gang members were gathered around a mahjong table, with a few women beside them. A short man sat there, his appearance unremarkable, but his exposed arms were corded with lean muscle. If he stood in a crowd, no one would notice him. Yet the woman sitting next to him, smiling as she handed him a cigarette, couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. When Xiangzi entered, The others barely reacted. The short man didn't even bother to look up. Only a bald man glanced at him and said slowly, "No manners. Where's Xiaoyang?" Xiaoyang was the blonde guy. Immediately, Xiangzi threw himself at the short man's feet, his voice trembling as he wailed, "Boss Wu, today Brother Liang took us to collect goods, but we met a group of survivors who wouldn't pay. If they won't pay, just kill them all and bring the stuff back. Do you really need to report that?" Before Boss Wu could speak, another man chimed in with a mocking laugh. "Did you catch them?" Seeing that the inner circle and Boss Wu didn't take him seriously, Xiangzi panicked even more and shouted. Brother Liang was about to act when a guy in a bus charged in and killed several brothers. Even Brother Liang was taken down on the spot. "Boss Wu, you have to avenge them." The entire mahjong table went dead silent. The inner circle members stared at each other, disbelief written on their faces. The bald man froze and muttered, "Are you drunk? Who would dare do that now?" At this point, the short man finally spoke. As soon as he did, the bald man shut up instantly. "Are you telling the truth?" "Yes, Boss Wu." Xiangzi nodded frantically. He wouldn't dare lie in this situation. He just wasn't sure if the blonde guy was still alive, but with that hit, even if he wasn't dead, he wouldn't last long. Under Boss Wu's questioning, Xiangzi recounted the whole event without missing a detail, even exaggerating a bit. He was lucky enough to swerve into an alley just before being hit, which was how he kept his life. In his heart, he only hoped Boss Wu would kill me miserably to vent his anger. After hearing the story, the inner circle members were fuming. "Damn it, daring to touch our people. They must have a death wish. Does this guy not know how to write the word death?" Just then, Boss Wu suddenly stood up, making the woman beside him jump in terror. He kicked his chair away, glared at Xiangzi, and delivered a heavy kick. Xiangzi flew into the coffee table, howling in pain. "Everyone else is dead, so why are you back alive?" Boss Wu's voice was raspy, his cold gaze making Xiangzi shiver as he hurriedly gritted his teeth to swallow his cries. Boss Wu didn't look at him again. He turned to his inner circle and said, "Get the vehicles ready. We leave now. If we're late, he'll run." In his eyes, anyone who dared to cause such a scene would likely flee in their bus, and that was something he wouldn't allow. The gang immediately got up to prepare. Just then, a massive explosion suddenly rang out from outside. The blast terrified the women, making them scream. Even the inner circle members were startled. "Damn it! What was that?" the bald man shouted. The sound was too loud. Boss Wu walked quickly to the window, pulled the curtain, and looked down. He looked twice, then suddenly turned and asked, "That bus you mentioned, what color was it?" Xiangzi was stunned for a moment and then hurriedly replied, "White. Parked right in front of that house. You'll see it as soon as you get there." "No need," Boss Wu interrupted, turning back with a frozen face and a voice full of killing intent. "They've come right to our door." "What?" Boss Wu's words left everyone, including Xiangzi, in total disbelief. That explosion just now? Was it caused by that bus? They were about to run to the window to check, but seeing Boss Wu's darkened face as he grabbed a bag and headed out, they followed. In his hand was a loose bag, clinking with the sound of glass bottles with every step. Inside were gasoline bottles. Just light them and throw them, and they'd become homemade Molotov cocktails, simple but extremely dangerous. At his waist, a black handgun was tucked into his belt. A Type 54. After the apocalypse broke out, Boss Wu had led a raid on the town's police station, taking batons, handcuffs, and several guns. All the firearms were in his hands because he was paranoid and never trusted anyone else with them. "Pick up your weapons," Boss Wu's cold voice echoed as he stepped out the door. The gang immediately sprang into action, grabbing iron bars, spike strips, and Molotovs before rushing downstairs. Xiangzi hesitated for a moment, but finally gritted his teeth and stood up, limping after them. The women sitting around the mahjong table looked at each other in confusion. They were all prisoners here, tormented by the gang. They crowded at the window, looking down to see a white bus that immediately caught their eyes. They had grown numb to these kinds of conflicts. Perhaps in a moment, Molotovs would fly, flames would engulf the bus, and the driver would be dragged out and tortured to death. The apocalypse had come. Girls who once cried over a dead cat or dog were now used to seeing people die before their eyes. "It'd be great if those bastards got hit by a car and died," a young girl whispered through gritted teeth. "What nonsense are you spouting? Watch out, or they'll hear you. Stop talking. How could he possibly get hit by a car? The girl was quickly gagged by her best friend. The fear of the gang, especially Ingwu, was deeply ingrained in their minds. At this moment, Ingwu and his men had rushed down to the ground floor. As soon as they stepped out of the auto repair shop, a sickening sight unfolded before their eyes. A whole row of motorcycles had been smashed straight into the wall, piled on top of each other. Thrown atop that wreckage was a person, his hands bound with rope. His head and body were covered in rotten vegetable leaves and all sorts of garbage, and he was groaning incessantly in pain. Xiangzi, who had just caught up, widened his eyes at the scene. Brothering, that guy who looks like he just crawled out of a dumpster is Huang Mao. Ingwu looked at Huang Mao coldly. As soon as he saw Ingwu, Huang Mao's groans immediately grew louder. Ingwu, save me. My legs are crushed. He wailed miserably, tears and snot streaming down his face. His legs were broken, and he didn't even know how he would survive in the future. Ingwu merely glanced at him without saying a word. Seeing that expression, Huang Mao's cries choked in his throat. From Ingwu's face, he only saw disgust, and that filled him with despair. Later, don't let that bus driver die. I want to capture him alive. Ingwu gritted out every word, his heart overflowing with hatred for me. Ever since the apocalypse began, he had become the little king of this town. When facing survivors, the biker gang always felt like they were of a different species, like slave owners standing before slaves. In their eyes, survivors were nothing but tools to be ordered around. Most of the survivors were resigned, trying to flatter them just to stay alive, which only inflated their sense of superiority. They never thought anyone would dare to openly oppose them, let alone come right to their doorstep to provoke them. Seeing Ingwu so furious, his subordinates all understood that I definitely wouldn't die an easy death. Brothers, let's go catch that fool. They roared, picking up the motorcycles that could still run, their engines roaring. Which way did that vehicle go? The exit was completely blocked by motorcycles, but the bus was nowhere to be seen. Looking down from upstairs, they had only seen the bus backing up. In their minds, after doing something so crazy, I would definitely run away. What would follow was a chase, which was their specialty. Just a few Molotov cocktails would be enough to send the bus to hell. But right at that moment, a deafening crash rang out. The sound came from the gas station. Miserable screams echoed out. That place was supposed to be guarded by their men, but clearly, the gas station had been attacked. He dares to enter my gas station? Murderous intent flashed in Ingwu's eyes. The gas station was less than 200 meters away. Not only did I not run, but I even dared to strike directly at the gas station. I was truly tired of living. Ingwu suddenly dashed forward like a leopard, leaping over the motorcycles and sprinting straight toward the gas station. His subordinates snapped back to reality and immediately revved their engines to chase after him. At the gas station, I had connected the bus's automatic refueling device to the pump nozzle. Gasoline continuously flowed into the nearly empty tank. This gang had gathered almost all the gasoline in town here. I probably couldn't use up all this fuel even if I tried. At the same time, my eyes never left the direction of the small building, waiting for Ingwu to appear. After careful consideration, I realized that if I let Ingwu come to my door, Wen Lu and the others could easily be implicated. Even if they hid beforehand, it wouldn't necessarily be safe, because this gang was too large. With just one small mistake, I wouldn't be able to protect them. Moreover, what I needed most right now was gasoline. It was all in Ingwu's hands. To get the gas, I had to come here. Smashing those motorcycles was just a distraction, while attacking the gas station was to buy time to refuel. Without enough fuel, I didn't dare use some of the weapons on the base vehicle. I monitored the fuel level displayed through the parameters provided by the star seed. 100 liters, 200 liters, 300 liters. Ever since upgrading the fuel tank, the refueling speed was unbelievably fast. As soon as the hose was connected, the fuel volume skyrocketed by the hundreds of liters. When the gauge hit the 600-liter mark, a figure suddenly appeared next to the flower bed outside the gas station. That figure charged straight toward the station. Seeing my bus, he rushed over without hesitation. So fast, I was slightly startled. I didn't even need to guess to know that it was Ingwu. Seeing my bus parked right at the gas station refueling, Ingwu's anger flared up violently. I had killed his men, openly provoked him, and now I dared to blatantly pump gas right in front of his face. Ingwu charged straight at the base vehicle, his body darting forward like a leopard. His speed was no less than that of a top athlete. Since I was parked inside the gas station, Ingwu couldn't use Molotov cocktails, nor did he dare risk firing a gun. He pulled out a triangular dagger from behind his back. This knife was probably also confiscated evidence from the police station, seized for violating weapon control laws, only to end up in his hands. Right at that moment, the gas nozzle popped out. At the same time, the vehicle's body let out a piercing screech of grinding metal. I started the engine, then slammed on the gas to accelerate fiercely. The bulky bus shot backward like a massive cannonball, hurtling straight toward Ingwu. I didn't activate the instant acceleration, but after upgrading the fuel tank, the vehicle's overall performance had skyrocketed. Its startup speed was unbelievably fast. Now, the bus was speeding in reverse, letting out a sharp screech, no different from a supercar. Even though he had heard Xiangzi's description, Ingwu still didn't believe a bus could be this terrifying. But the moment it started, all his perceptions were shattered. This was no longer a bus, but an absurdly agile machine. Moreover, I had deliberately waited until he closed in before suddenly accelerating. Ingwu was forced to halt his charge and quickly dodge to the side. The vehicle brushed past him. In that split second, Ingwu spun around and threw a spike strip toward the tires. That thing had been dismantled from specialized police tire deflation devices and even modified by him. If the wheels rolled over it, the spikes would pierce the tires, and they would blow out after another 20 meters. But the bus rolled right over it completely unscathed. The spikes couldn't pierce the tires at all. Ingwu had heard that spike strips were useless against my vehicle, but he threw it anyway. His eyes locked onto the door handle of the driver's cabin. As the vehicle sped past at breakneck speed, he leaped up. Ingwu was truly fast. I only had time to see him dodge on the rearview monitor, then felt the vehicle's body shudder slightly, heard a thud, and suddenly a face was plastered against the window. At the same time, the roar of engines echoed in the distance. Several motorcycles had appeared on the road. I drove the vehicle out of the gas station. Motorcycles from the surrounding streets began to close in, growing in number. They had all rushed out from their base. I had knocked down a few earlier, slowing them down somewhat, but it didn't have a major impact. However, I didn't have time to pay attention to these hounds, because Ingwu was hanging right outside the vehicle's door. I turned my head, and the two of us immediately locked eyes. Ingwu flashed a sinister smile, then viciously stabbed his triangular dagger into the window gap. This was the weak point of many car windows, originally designed to be broken in emergency situations. A dagger wasn't a specialized tool, but with its hardness, it could absolutely do the trick. I absolutely wouldn't give him that chance. Even though he might not necessarily break the glass, he was an esper. Moreover, my vehicle had just been repaired. I couldn't let this gang leader ruin it. I cranked the steering wheel all the way. The tires shrieked piercingly against the concrete, leaving 4 long white skid marks. I slammed the gas. The vehicle, having just left the gas station, whipped around at an extremely sharp angle, almost flipping over. The scene looked exactly like a bus drifting. The screaming gang members were all stunned. During that sharp turn, Ingwu could only hold on with one hand and was instantly flung outward. For an ordinary person, this fall would definitely result in severe injuries. But when I looked out, he had rolled very skillfully the moment he hit the ground, remaining almost completely unscathed. I even saw something else appear in his hands. Ingwu's face turned ugly. He hadn't expected the vehicle's performance to be this powerful, far exceeding what Xiangzi had described. But now that the vehicle was out of the gas station, he no longer had any reservations. As soon as he steadied himself, Ingwu immediately pulled out a few homemade Molotov cocktails and hurled them straight at my vehicle. The firebombs exploded against the chassis, and fierce flames erupted, engulfing the entire bus. Die! Right after throwing them, Ingwu drew a Type 54 pistol from his waist and aimed it at the driver's cabin window, where my silhouette was clearly visible behind the curtain of fire. The distance was less than 10 meters. He wasn't a sniper, but after the apocalypse, with what you'd call real combat experience, his shooting skills were more than enough. At this range, he aimed straight for my shoulder. If the bullet strayed and hit my neck or head, I could only call myself unlucky. Standard police pistols were mainly for suppression, with limited lethality. But the Type 54 was different. It was a military-grade weapon, focusing on raw power and combat capability. At close range, it could pierce through 2 human bodies, and even penetrate bulletproof vests and thin brick walls. Precisely because its lethality was too high, it had long been phased out of police service. Xianzi had once said that his guys had smashed my car windows until their hands wore out without leaving a single scratch, but Yingwu didn't care at all. What could iron pipes do against a Type 54 bullet? Die? He pulled the trigger without hesitation. From the moment he hit the ground, through the Molotovs, to firing the gun, everything happened in less than a second. Perhaps in that split second, I still thought I had successfully shaken Yingwu off. But in all likelihood, right at this moment, the bullet had already left the barrel. Bang! The gunshot rang out. Yingwu had struck with extreme speed. Almost the exact moment I saw him hit the ground, the vehicle was engulfed in flames, and the gunshot immediately followed. But even faster than the gunshot was a sharp crack that rang out right by the window next to me. I reflexively leaned away to dodge. At the same time, the familiar voice of the star seed echoed in my mind. Base vehicle surface damaged. Damage level, 10%. Vehicle window damaged, 1%. Base vehicle outer shell undamaged. Damn it. The damage level was so low it was almost negligible, but just thinking about having to find materials to repair it made me want to curse. I turned my head to look. A very clear spiderweb-shaped dent had appeared on the window, the mark left by the bullet. The Type 54 pistol's bullet could pierce through brick walls and many other obstacles, but there was still a limit to the thickness it could penetrate, not to mention my vehicle's windows were equipped with bulletproof glass. Bulletproof glass is multi-layered safety glass with a 3-tier structure. The first layer bears the impact, capable of shattering the bullet and deflecting its trajectory, causing it to lose kinetic energy. The second layer is an intermediate layer made of organic adhesive material, specialized in absorbing impact force. Even if it pierced the first layer, it would stop at the second. Therefore, it only left a dent on the glass without piercing through. Seeing this mark, I was truly furious. I had just finished repairing this vehicle. After the shot, Yingwu sneered coldly. He heard the sound of the bullet hitting the glass very clearly. He stood up straight, seemingly prepared to wait for the flames to die down, then have his subordinates rush up and drag me out. As long as I was still alive, that would make things interesting. But right at that moment, he heard a vroom 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 coming from the bus in front of him. Yingwu froze slightly. He was certain he had hit his mark. Was I not severely injured? The very next second, the front of the vehicle suddenly changed direction. The burning bus, like a war chariot bathed in a sea of fire, charged straight at him. Through the windshield, Yingwu clearly saw my furious eyes locked onto him. There wasn't a single wound on my body, let alone the bloody mess he had imagined. Yingwu tightened his grip on the gun, his eyes filled with bewilderment. What the hell was going on? Seeing the bus barreling toward him, a ferocious look washed over his face again. He raised his gun, aimed straight at me, and pulled the trigger repeatedly. All the bullets hit the windshield, but they were all stopped. The dents were clearly visible, while I remained calm behind the glass, my expression not changing in the slightest. Whoosh! The bus rushed past. I glanced quickly through the side window and saw Yingwu's silhouette dodging to the side of the vehicle, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision. He managed to dodge, but inside, he was practically going insane. This damn bus actually had bulletproof glass. This feeling was no different from seeing a cheap junker modified to an absurd degree. What kind of monster was this driver, to be driving such a terrifying bus? At this moment, Yingwu realized the bus had temporarily ignored him. It turned around and charged straight toward the thickest cluster of 7 or 8 motorcycles. After closing in on my vehicle, the gang members had started circling. When Yingwu fired, they also threw Molotov cocktails at the back of the bus. Initially, they all thought that since Yingwu had personally taken action, they only needed to provide support from the perimeter. There was no danger at all. But who would have thought that after a barrage of gunfire, the bus would be completely unscathed? On the contrary, it became even more ferocious. Not even Yingwu could stop it. Unable to hit him, the vehicle immediately switched targets to them. The entire gang instantly felt their scalps go numb. Facing the flaming bus, they desperately revved their engines to flee. But my vehicle wasn't just agile when turning. Its acceleration was also terrifyingly fast. Even though they tried to escape, they were quickly caught up to. One guy panicked and swerved toward the curb. A motorcycle slipped while turning and crashed straight into a flower bed, sending the rider flying dozens of meters away. The others couldn't react in time and were rammed by the bus, sent flying into the air. Some didn't die immediately, but with flames clinging to their bodies, they rolled around in agony, screaming miserably. Witnessing this scene, Ingwu was so furious he was about to go mad. I had tried to ram him twice, but failed both times, realizing his speed was simply too fast. Especially in short distances, he was extremely agile. The second time, I had intended to use the air cannon, but his reflexes were so quick that firing it would only waste energy. The air cannon also required time to charge up, enough for him to dodge dozens of times. But dealing with this gang didn't require such finesse. Just ramming straight into them with brute force was enough. They kept throwing Molotov cocktails at my vehicle, increasing the damage level and driving me mad with anger. I didn't want to let these annoying flies keep tailing me anymore, so I decided to temporarily ignore Ingwu. I showed no mercy. However ruthless Ingwu was, they were no better. They were all scumbags with a mountain of crimes. After sending a few more motorcycles flying, I still didn't stop. Having just filled up on gas, I didn't need to worry about fuel consumption. With a sharp turn of the wheel, the bus turned around like a steel monster again, charging straight at another group of gang members. Instantly, they fled in panic. The bus roared past Ingwu, and I only turned my head to look at him exactly once. Just that one look was enough to make Ingwu grit his teeth hard. Being provoked right on his own turf, and having to stand there watching that person drive a bus, chasing his subordinates until they scattered, some dead, some fleeing. Was there anything more humiliating than this? I drove the bus, ramming straight into the gang until the flames on the vehicle's body completely died out. The surviving members had also fled in panic, hiding in places the bus couldn't reach. Only then did I slowly decelerate and come to a stop. The bus stood towering in the middle of the road, leaving clear tire tracks on the concrete surface. Overlapping with the black scorch marks caused by the Molotov cocktails, it created an incredibly glaring scene. On the ground were smashed motorcycles and the scattered corpses of the gang members, mixed with the injured groaning for help. I honked the horn twice. The piercing sound echoed across the empty street, but not a single one of them dared to show their face. They had been completely scared out of their wits by that frenzied ramming just now. Right at that moment, a piercing screech of tires rang out, followed by a heavy-duty truck suddenly bursting out from the side. That was a true steel monster, with a payload of tens of tons. Just ramming into a small car would be enough to crush it into scrap metal. Compared to it, my bus looked like a child standing in front of an adult. The heavy truck barreled straight onto the road, facing me directly from a distance. In the cabin, which was as high as a person's head, I clearly saw Ingwu gripping the steering wheel tightly. His hate-filled eyes were locked onto the bus, his face twisted in madness. That ramming just now had truly enraged him to the core. A boss, standing right here, forced to watch helplessly as my bus dashed back and forth in front of him, crushing his subordinates one by one. The incessant groans and cries for help from the injured reached Ingwu's ears, so grating that it drove him mad. Ever since the apocalypse began, after discovering he had an Esper ability, Ingwu had lived with a sense of invincibility. This town didn't have many zombies. Luring them away was easy enough. Nothing could pose a challenge to him. Survivors, in his eyes, were no different from ants. He could stomp them to death whenever he wanted. His subordinates all revered and feared him, obeying him absolutely. Before the apocalypse, he was just a petty thug, cruel, but lacking the guts to put his life on the line. Oppressed by his boss, looked down upon by others. But now, this world made him feel like a fish in water, feeling as if the apocalypse was born just for him. But right when he was at his most smug, his dignity was crushed by a bus right in front of his subordinates. In his mind, it felt as if his face had been stamped with filthy tire tracks. If he couldn't kill me, he knew he would never be able to hold his head high again. Therefore, while I was still driving the bus and smashing everything in sight, Ingwu had run off. He drove the heavy truck that had been abandoned after the apocalypse, which the gang had later towed back from the gas station, and charged straight here. The bus was so good at ramming people. Then he would ram me to death. No matter how formidable this bus was, he didn't believe it could go head-to-head with a heavy-duty truck like this. Virum, virum, virum. Ing-woo floored the gas pedal. Watching that steel monster barrel toward me, my heart pounded heavily. The visual pressure created by a heavy truck charging at top speed was absolutely terrifying. If I actually got hit, I might not necessarily die, but the base vehicle would definitely suffer severe damage. However, Ing-woo thinking he could just use this truck to ram me was far too naive. The base vehicle had an instant acceleration mode. Whether dodging or turning around, it wouldn't be a problem. But I didn't press the acceleration button. Running away was easy, but if I did that, the purpose of my coming here wouldn't be fulfilled. On the contrary, I stared intently at the oncoming truck and also stepped on the gas to accelerate. Although this moment was dangerous, to me, it was an opportunity, a very good opportunity to finish off Ing-woo. I focused intensely, my eyes locked onto the heavy truck, while the star seed continuously reported the distance between the two vehicles. Seeing that I didn't run, but instead charged straight at him, Ing-woo let out a cold laugh. Haha, this guy is truly arrogant. I'll crush you. Crush you. He couldn't wait any longer. In his mind, the image of the bus's mangled front had already appeared, with me crushed like meat in a grinder, blood seeping through the cracks. The thrill made his entire body tremble. The gas pedal was floored to the max. Maniacal laughter echoed in the cabin. The remaining gang members also saw this scene. In their eyes, my bus was practically committing suicide. It was truly like striking a rock with an egg. Inside the vehicle, I maintained a calm demeanor. While listening to the star seed report the data, I quickly calculated in my head. Now is the time. I suddenly pressed the button. 10, 9, 8. The distance between the two vehicles was so close that I could clearly see the expression on Ing-woo's face. He was smiling sinisterly, yelling something at me. His lip movements clearly formed the words, die. I didn't say anything. In my mind, there was only the cold countdown of the star seed. 3, 2. The distance was only 10 meters. Boom. An earth-shattering explosion rang out. The twisted, thrilled expression on Ing-woo's face instantly froze. I could almost clearly see the speeding heavy truck being stopped dead in its tracks in the blink of an eye. The terrifying power of the air cannon slammed straight into the front of the truck. The windshield shattered like flying snow, sweeping over Ing-woo. Immediately after, the front of the truck began to deform, violently thrown upward, while the heavy cargo bed in the back continued to barrel forward due to inertia. The front cabin and the cargo bed instantly collided with a horrifying impact. Crash! Bang! A series of explosions echoed like rolling thunder. A heavy-duty truck crashing created an extremely terrifying visual shockwave, especially when observed at such close range. Even knowing the truck wouldn't hit them, the gang members still couldn't hold back, screaming in panic and continuously backing away. The scene before them far exceeded their imagination. In almost the blink of an eye, the front of the truck had been crushed flat, completely deformed. The tragic end that Ing-woo had imagined would befall me had now rebounded onto himself, even more violently. The gang members were completely clueless as to what had just happened. Initially, they all thought that when the heavy truck rammed the bus, the outcome would be obvious. But no one expected that the moment the two vehicles were about to collide, the front of the truck would suddenly be thrown upward. Right before their eyes, the entire cabin was twisted beyond recognition. Even though Ing-woo was agile, he couldn't escape in time this time, getting crushed along with the front of the truck. The rear of the truck swung violently to the side due to inertia, letting out a piercing screech of friction against the road, before crashing down with a deafening boom. The entire process happened so fast that it made people unable to believe their own eyes. The noise was so loud that the gang members' ears rang, as if they had just witnessed an explosion. I saw a few pieces of debris fly up and hit the windshield, making a rapid series of crack-crack sounds. But these fragments didn't have enough force to damage the bulletproof glass. Sitting in the vehicle, I took a deep breath. The fate of the heavy truck didn't surprise me, but seeing it with my own eyes still left me feeling overwhelmed. I knew the power of the air cannon well, and to be absolutely sure, I had deliberately waited until the distance between the two vehicles was at its shortest before firing. If I had moved forward even a little more when the truck was hit, my base vehicle might have been affected too. I had aimed the cannon's muzzle straight at the truck's cabin, so I didn't even need to confirm to know that Ing-Wu was definitely dead. Even though he was an Esper, he was ultimately still flesh and blood. In the face of this power, he had absolutely no chance of survival. I breathed a sigh of relief. Just now, I had focused intensely to listen to the Starseed's reports and command the firing, which had consumed quite a bit of mental and physical energy. Right at that moment, the Starseed suddenly spoke up. Escaping energy detected. Do you wish to absorb it? I was slightly surprised. Escaping energy? Even though I wasn't sure what it was, I immediately gave the command in my mind. Absorb. The Starseed replied. Absorption process underway. Mutant energy absorbed. Energy has been stored. Current energy level is insufficient for an upgrade. You may continue to store it or use it to enhance the defense of the base vehicle's armor. Mutant energy? I was momentarily confused, but when I looked at the overturned truck, I instantly understood. This energy must be the Esper energy from Ing-Wu's body. After he died, the energy in his body escaped and was detected and absorbed by the base vehicle. This was different from the star core of the mutant wild boar. Esper energy naturally existed within an Esper's body. Using abilities would consume it, while only a minuscule amount would leak out, too little for the base vehicle to detect. But when an Esper died, all the energy would escape at once. It was just a pity that Ing-Wu's Esper level was too low, not even reaching level 1. So this amount of energy wasn't enough for the base vehicle to evolve. However, it could still be used to enhance the defense of the vehicle's outer shell. Thinking of this, I immediately felt it was necessary. The base vehicle's current defensive capabilities were already starting to show their limits. It could withstand the rams of a mutant wild boar, but the gang's homemade Molotov cocktails had already caused damage. Soon, I would have to head to Jinling, a major eastern city with a permanent population of over 8 million. In a place like that, the danger level would definitely far exceed this small town. The current armor was clearly not enough. Every upgrade meant an increased chance of survival. Moreover, I had absolutely no idea what the current situation in Jinling was like. I had thought the internet wouldn't collapse so quickly, but from the beginning until now, I still couldn't connect. It was probably due to widespread explosions and fires. If the network was still up, I might have learned more news, and maybe even contacted other survivors. But even without knowing anything, I was certain of one thing. The more populated and developed a place was, the more it had now become a death zone. While thinking, I quickly made a decision. This mutant energy was much weaker than the level 1 mutant wild boar star core, not enough for an evolution, but it was just right for enhancing the vehicle's armor defense. This upgrade wouldn't affect my ability to continue driving. Furthermore, the completion time was the fastest among all the items I had upgraded before. It only took 15 minutes. Once confirmed, I shifted my gaze toward the remaining gang members. They were still standing there in a daze, staring at the heavy truck with expressions of disbelief. Until now, they had always treated Ing-Wu as their center, fearing and obeying him absolutely. Now, Ing-Wu had died right before their eyes. Perhaps in the moment they snapped back to reality, they would think that even without Ing-Wu, they could continue to run rampant thanks to the foundation he left behind. But just as that thought flashed through their minds, a chilling cold ran down their spines, because they all simultaneously looked toward the bus. Inside the vehicle, I was also looking at them. When our eyes met, I suddenly slammed on the gas. Seeing the bus move and charge toward them, the gang members instantly fell into utter panic, hastily starting their motorcycles and fleeing. For these scumbags, I never had any intention of showing mercy. They had committed countless crimes and had tried to take my life twice. I wasn't a generous person. Once you made a move against me, I wouldn't hold back either. Hearing the roar of the bus's engine behind them, the gang members were truly scared out of their wits. Even the heavy-duty truck had been defeated. Riding these flimsy motorcycles was no different from suicide for them. Get into the alleys. He can't chase us there, someone yelled while desperately swerving. They hastily rushed into the alleys, but before they could get far, groups of zombies suddenly appeared, howling as they lunged out, dragging them off their bikes and tearing into them. The number of zombies was not small. Staggering, yet extremely fast figures continuously appeared on the streets. They knew no fear, nor did they care about injury or death. Their reflexes and explosive power were terrifying. The gang members were intercepted one by one. Some were dragged down, some were surrounded, and ultimately, they were submerged in miserable screams. Clearly, the earlier explosions had drawn them here. However, most of the zombies had been lured far away beforehand. There were only about 100 left hiding in the buildings. This number posed no threat to me, but to the gang, it was a nightmare. Caught between me chasing from behind and the zombies ambushing from the front, it wasn't long before they were either rammed to death by my bus or died in the mouths of the zombies. A few zombies shifted their targets to me. At first, I didn't bother paying attention to them. It wasn't until I was certain the entire gang had been wiped out that I turned the vehicle around and began dealing with the remaining zombies. Thud, smash. Bloody collisions rang out one after another. I drove the base vehicle back and forth down the street a few times, even deliberately honking the horn to lure out the ones busy gnawing on corpses. They frantically charged at the vehicle. Their hideous hands and faces were sent flying the moment they touched the glass, or they were crushed beneath the tires. Before long, not a single zombie was left standing on the street. On the main road outside the gas station, aside from the overturned heavy truck, there were only corpses and scattered motorcycles left. The scene was so brutal it made one's blood run cold. Looking at this sight, I let out a long breath. This was the apocalypse. People say human lives are as cheap as grass. Only now did I truly understand. Zombies ate people, and people killed each other. If I didn't kill others, others would kill me. After waiting a moment longer to confirm the surroundings were completely quiet, I drove the bus back to the overturned heavy truck, stopping next to the deformed cabin. Once I was certain this position couldn't be ambushed and that I could immediately return to the vehicle if anything went wrong, I carefully opened the door and stepped out. In fact, the spot where I stood was tucked neatly into a blind spot created by the truck's cabin and the base vehicle. Even if zombies appeared, they wouldn't be able to approach. I directly faced the driver's seat of the truck. But now it had been crushed into a twisted block of metal, completely losing its original shape. Blood seeped out from the crevices. Looking closely, I saw a hand sticking out from the bottom. Given his status as an esper, a gang leader, and the little emperor of this town, I originally thought Wu would definitely have quite a few valuable items on him. But this condition made me realize I couldn't pull him out. Whatever was on his body was as good as trashed. Just as I was feeling regretful, I suddenly spotted a black object lying right under that hand. I used my foot to kick Wu's hand aside. It was the gun. Because of its small size, it hadn't been crushed and had even fallen out from a gap when the truck overturned. Overjoyed, I immediately picked up the gun, being extremely careful to avoid an accidental discharge. After inspecting it closely and confirming the gun wasn't deformed or damaged, I finally let out a faint smile. Even though I had never used a Type 54 pistol before, I had played with toy guns plenty of times when I was a kid. Before my parents passed away, they even took me to a shooting range to try it out once, so I still remembered the basics. The magazine was loaded, but the bullets were still in the mag. To fire, I had to chamber a round. The gun had a safety catch. After chambering a round, the safety had to be taken off to fire. The safety was also off. I carefully ejected the bullet from the chamber and flipped the safety back on. Only then did I feel at ease holding the gun to examine it further. Picking up a Type 54 pistol gave me a bit more peace of mind. I searched for a while longer, but aside from blood and debris, there was nothing else of value. I got in, restarted the base vehicle, and drove straight back to the gas station. Finally, there was no one left to bother me while I refueled. All the gasoline in town had been gathered here by Wu and his gang. Now it all belonged to me. The base vehicle moved into position, and the automatic refueling system activated. The hose connected straight to the nozzle. Instantly, a massive amount of gasoline continuously flowed into the tank. The fuel tank was like a bottomless pit, swallowing it all. The fuel consumed during the battle was quickly replenished, and then it continued to rise. 1,000 liters, 1,500 liters, 2,000 liters, until it reached 10,000 liters. 10 cubic meters of gasoline, all sitting inside my base vehicle. This feeling made me extremely comfortable, especially when I remembered how I used to struggle just for 20 liters of gas. Finally, the tank was full. If I still had to hoard it bit by bit like before, who knows how long it would have taken me to reach this number. With a full tank, my heart also felt much lighter. Now, the base vehicle could freely accelerate and use other functions without a second thought. This made me much more confident for the trip to Jinling. After filling up, I still didn't stop. Searching further around the station, I found a small tanker truck. It was full of gas and wasn't leaking at all. I smiled and immediately towed this tanker, hitching it to the back of the bus. Once connected, I had no way to carry any more gas, so I regretfully had to leave the rest behind. If I couldn't find gas after entering Jinling later, I could always come back here. With preparations complete, I drove the base vehicle toward the gang's old base, the small building they had occupied. Outside the auto repair shop, a few corpses lay scattered on the ground. Their bodies were torn apart, some even missing limbs. I quickly recognized Huang Mao's figure among those corpses. They were all the remaining gang members left at the base. After the loud explosion earlier, the zombies were drawn here, and they were caught in a surprise attack. Then, the zombies gnawing on the corpses were lured away by my horn, and ultimately, they were all taken down by me. I parked the base vehicle right in front of the auto repair shop. Earlier, I was too focused on refueling, and only now did I realize the armor upgrade process was complete. On the outside, it looked no different, even with the added mutant energy. But when I lightly tapped the vehicle's body, I immediately felt a very slight elasticity, as if the armor could absorb a portion of the impact force. In reality, the armor was still incredibly tough. That elastic feeling was due to the internal structure's ability to dissipate impact force, giving the illusion of tapping on a soft cushion. However, the feedback was very faint, proving that the amount of mutant energy the base vehicle had absorbed was still too little. Even so, just this small change alone was enough to satisfy me. The ability to absorb impact force would significantly reduce the vehicle's damage in future confrontations. I gripped the wrench tightly in my hand, while raising the Type 54 pistol, chambering around, and taking off the safety. Keeping my finger off the trigger, I carefully stepped out of the vehicle. Stepping over the scattered corpses, I entered the auto repair shop, then followed the hallway, slowly making my way toward the stairs. Earlier, Huang Mao had told me about the layout of this building. It had 4 floors in total. The bottom 3 floors were the gang's living quarters, while the 4th floor was Ying Wu's private area. All the resources they had plundered were stored there. Even though I judged that there were almost no gang members left alive inside, I still maintained my vigilance, taking every step with extreme caution. On the 4th floor, the women who had been watching through the window were now huddled together, holding hands tightly, their faces filled with anxiety and panic. They heard my footsteps approaching, each step echoing in the hallway, growing clearer by the second. Earlier, they had witnessed with their own eyes as I drove the bus straight through everything in my path, culminating in the horrifying collision that turned Ying Wu's heavy truck into a pile of scrap metal. That scene made them unable to believe their eyes. A beat-up old bus, looking like it was about to fall apart, could actually smash the front of a heavy-duty truck to pieces. With that level of damage, Ying Wu, sitting in the cabin, had definitely been crushed into a pile of minced meat. They stared at the deformed driver's cabin, watching the blood seep out from inside, unable to believe that Ying Wu was dead. Ying Wu, the one who was once invincible, the one so strong he drove others to despair, the ruler of this entire town, the one who could torture anyone to death just for looking at him wrong. Today, he had been killed. Was this just a nightmare? But before they could even recover their wits, they heard violent crashes and the roar of an engine again. The bus, like an enraged wild beast, charged straight into the remaining gang members. It was like a tiger charging into a flock of sheep, crushing everything. The gang members fled in panic, but there were only 2 outcomes: either be rammed to death or be torn apart by zombies. That scene made these women feel as if they were dreaming. In just a few short minutes, those ruthless, wolf-like scumbags had been completely wiped out. All the women imprisoned here were victims of kidnapping and coercion. They hated the gang, hated Ying Wu to the bone. Now, witnessing him and his subordinates suffer a tragic end, one even more terrifying than what they had inflicted on others, they found it hard to believe, not even daring to accept the truth. After wiping out the zombies and the gang, the bus returned to the side of the truck. They saw me step out of the vehicle, wearing only a simple black t-shirt and jeans, looking very young. Earlier, watching the bus charge so madly, they had thought the driver must be some ferocious demon, but they never expected it to be just a young man. Next, they watched with their own eyes as I climbed onto the truck's cabin and retrieved the gun from Ingwoo's hand. That scene completely confirmed one thing. Ingwoo was truly dead, and the one who killed him was me. It's him. He killed Ingwoo. He. An older woman said to Xiaoru, her voice trembling. Xiaoru was the youngest among them, only 18. When the apocalypse struck, both her parents had died. She and her 12-year-old brother only had each other to rely on. But both of them were in poor health. Hunger, thirst, and illness constantly wore them down, pushing them to despair. Then they were caught by the gang, coerced, tortured, and abused. For her brother's life, Xiaoru was forced to trade her dignity just for a meal and a box of medicine. She felt incredibly filthy, waking up from nightmares night after night. Tears soaked her pillow. But she had no other choice. This was the apocalypse. Human lives were cheap, especially for girls with no ability to defend themselves. She could only endure it, or die along with her brother. She had wanted to commit suicide many times, but she couldn't leave her brother behind. And today, seeing Ingwoo crushed like a snake, the emotions in her heart completely burst out. She hugged herself tightly, tears streaming down endlessly. She didn't know if it was out of joy or pain. She tried to wipe them away, but the tears kept falling. Her eyes were fixed on the door, listening to the footsteps drawing closer and closer. She knew that young man was coming in. At that moment, her heart was filled with fear and anxiety, but also mixed with an indescribable excitement. She didn't know where her fate would lead next. It took me about 10 minutes to climb up to the 4th floor. As soon as I set foot there, I heard movement from inside. I raised my gun, slowly approached the half-closed door, then suddenly kicked it hard, throwing it wide open. Nobody moved. When I blurted that out, I even felt like I was role-playing as someone else. Inside the room, several women stood huddled together, facing the door as if they had been waiting for a long time. Seeing me kick the door open and point a pitch-black gun at them, they all stood frozen in place, trembling. A group of girls huddled together, none of them knowing what their fate would be. Ingwoo was dead, but what about me? There was no doubt that I was the one who killed him, and it was highly likely that I would become the one in control of everything here, becoming the new ruler of this town. As long as I wanted to, with just a single thought, I could absolutely become their new master. They had been beaten, enslaved, and abused by Ingwoo, which left them with almost no hope for life. The only thing they hoped for right now was that this new master could give them a little food to keep living. Seeing the group of girls, my tense expression relaxed a bit, but I still didn't let my guard down. These seemingly frail girls could still potentially be gang members. Just a gun in their hands would be enough to take my life. I absolutely couldn't take the risk. Hands up. One by one, step forward. I spoke up. The women looked at me, their eyes full of fear. Hurry up, I urged. Xiaoru wiped her tears, raised both hands high, and stepped forward. As she approached, I kept the gun in my hand while stepping closer to pat her down. When I touched her, Xiaoru's body trembled slightly, but she didn't dodge. She bit her lip and looked at me. Done. Go stand over there. Next, I said after finishing the search. She obediently stepped aside. Not long after, I had finished searching all the remaining women. They didn't have any weapons on them. I judged that they were most likely kidnapped by the gang, perhaps formerly Ingwoo's women. After being searched, the women huddled in the corner of the room, looking at me with uneasy eyes. Boss, a girl in a red shirt spoke up tremblingly. What are you going to do with us? That girl looked to be in her early 20s, with a full figure and a beautiful face. In fact, most of the girls in this room were young and attractive. Some had an innocent look, while others were alluring and sexy. Each had her own unique charm. In the red shirt girl's mind, I was the one holding the power to decide their fate. A group of weak women with no ability to resist. Rare was the man who wouldn't feel lust. But looking at me, I was much younger and better looking than Ingwoo. If I wasn't too cruel, the thought of following me probably wasn't that hard to accept. In the apocalypse, a girl like her could only survive by relying on the strong. I glanced at the girl in red, not bothering to reply. My gaze swept across the entire room, finally stopping on Xiaoru. Not because she was beautiful, but because she was skinny and frail, looking completely incapable of posing any threat. You. I pointed the gun at Xiao Ru, my voice somewhat cold. Come here. Called out so suddenly, Xiao Ru's expression changed slightly. She hadn't expected to be the first one called. She bit her lip, but ultimately still walked toward me. When Yingwu died, a faint glimmer of hope had sparked in her heart, but even she didn't know what she was hoping for. She stood in front of me, her eyes squeezed shut, her eyelashes trembling slightly. One hand unconsciously gripped her collar tightly, her knuckles turning white from the force. It was a look of reluctance, yet forced acceptance. Why are you closing your eyes? I frowned, not understanding what nonsense she was thinking. I'm asking you, where did that guy Wu stash the supplies? I cut straight to the point. Yingwu had gathered quite a lot of resources. There definitely wouldn't be a shortage. Xiao Ru froze, opened her eyes, and then blankly raised her hand to point at a room. As she lowered her hand, her eyes were still dazed. This person is only asking about supplies? Open the door, I said. It's locked, she replied timidly. I didn't say another word. I walked straight to the door, aimed at the lock, and leaned to the side. Bang! The gunshot rang out, and my arm jerked slightly. I held the gun very firmly, so the recoil didn't throw the barrel off much. The girls in the room screamed in unison, covering their ears. The lock was blasted apart, and I kicked the door open. The room that Yingwu had carefully kept locked, forbidding anyone from entering, was now busted open by me in the most brutal way. I stood outside the door and glanced inside. Then, under the terrified gazes of Xiao Ru and the others, I stepped into the room. The moment I set foot inside, I couldn't help but be amazed. This room was like a food warehouse. From floor to ceiling, it was stacked with all kinds of supplies. There was even a refrigerator packed with fresh food. Currently, my main food source was mutant pork, a type of food that could enhance physical strength, but these fresh vegetables could improve my palate. In the apocalypse, this was incredibly precious. It was just a pity I couldn't take it all with me. Yingwu had built his base right next to the gas station, with generators running day and night, keeping the fridge at a constant temperature to preserve the fresh food. I could only take a portion of these things. Thinking of Jiang Zhuiying hiding in a house without electricity, probably just surviving on dry rations day by day, it made me want to bring some fresh food for her even more. This also made me feel an even more urgent need to upgrade the base vehicle's storage space. If the space was big enough, I could even bring along refrigerators packed full of food. Besides that, the vacuum-sealed foods were also incredibly abundant. Ham, bacon, shredded rabbit meat. In truth, I had already stockpiled quite a bit of food, but the apocalypse had only just begun. The further along we went, the harder it would be to gather food. Even if it wasn't mutant beast meat, these were still incredibly precious resources. I certainly wouldn't complain about having too much. Since there were so many supplies, I told one of the girls to go find some sacks to pack things in. In total, I stuffed 10 large sacks full. It was unclear if these sacks were previously used to hold supplies that survivors were forced to hand over. While packing, I discovered a box neatly placed in the corner of the room, wrapped very carefully. When I opened it, I couldn't help but smile. Inside were the things Yingwu had looted from the police station, which were incredibly precious to him. 2 bulletproof vests, a stun baton, a large amount of ammunition, and a police helmet. These things were all very useful to me, especially the bulletproof vests and ammunition. I was currently lacking both. With bulletproof vests, my self-defense capabilities would be significantly enhanced. As for the ammunition, it ensured that the Type 54 pistol in my hand wouldn't turn into scrap metal. When inside the base vehicle, I was both safe and capable of fighting, but once I stepped out like now, I needed other measures to protect myself. This box was truly an unexpected surprise. I decided to take it all. Because there was too much stuff, I had to transport it in batches. My stamina was already good, and after eating mutant beast meat, it had been further enhanced. Carrying supplies and climbing the stairs a few times was absolutely no problem. The girls stood huddled in the corner of the room, silently watching me continuously carry sack after sack of supplies downstairs. I ran back and forth over 10 times, gradually transporting all the supplies from the storage room down to the vehicle. I didn't know if it was because I had been eating a lot of mutant beast meat lately, but throughout the entire process, I didn't feel tired at all. This transportation work was quite light for me. Before long, the base vehicle was stuffed to the brim. Realizing there was no more room to fit anything else, I had to secure the remaining sacks onto the luggage rack on the roof. Looking at the bus now, it looked even more beat up than before. With the roof piled high with sacks, it looked exactly like rural migrant workers hauling their bulky luggage into the city. Finally, every possible spot to store supplies had been thoroughly utilized by me, but there was still a portion I couldn't take. I had no choice but to pick out high-calorie, small-sized foods like chocolate to keep on my person. I cast one last regretful glance at the storage room, then turned and walked out. Seeing me come out empty-handed this time, no longer carrying heavy sacks, the girls couldn't help but glance toward the storage room. Did he take it all? Xiaoru gripped the hem of her shirt tightly, her heart filled with despair. When Yingwu was alive, they never dared to go anywhere near the supply room. Not just them, even the other gang members weren't allowed to approach it. Only a few of Yingwu's trusted confidants were permitted to enter. Therefore, they didn't know how much stuff was in there. But seeing me solely focused on gathering supplies, they assumed I had taken everything. Without food, they had absolutely no idea how they were going to survive. After leaving the storage room, I also searched Yingwu's living room and bedroom, but didn't find anything useful. I decided to head straight out. Right at that moment, Xiaoru bit her lip and mustered all her courage to call out to me. Please, wait a moment. I turned my head to look at her. The girls in the room immediately showed obvious tension. Xiaoru looked at me, momentarily unsure of how to speak up. They all understood that I had no reason to leave food for them. But without food, it meant death. Asking me to leave some supplies was asking too much, and if I refused, it would be completely understandable. She stammered. Seeing this, I started to lose my patience. I stepped outside, preparing to go downstairs, but suddenly stopped and turned back inside. When they saw me step out the door, the hope in Xiaoru and the others' hearts had almost completely extinguished. But the moment I turned back, their eyes instantly lit up with expectation. A few girls even wanted to ask if they could follow me. To be honest, I was young and not bad-looking. If they could follow me and have food to eat, most of them would be more than willing. But they didn't dare to open their mouths. They felt that I didn't care about them at all. If they asked, they would very likely be rejected, and that would be too humiliating. Moreover, they didn't have any special abilities. They were just burdens. At this moment, I spoke up. If you want to join a survivor group, I can introduce you to a suitable one. But in that group, everyone has to earn their own keep. I'll call them over later. As for whether you join or not, you decide for yourselves. Of course, if you want to leave this place, you're free to go. There are still some supplies left in that room. You can take them. In my mind, leaving these supplies here was truly a waste. Even if they stayed, they didn't have the ability to protect them. Sooner or later, they would be targeted by others. Meanwhile, when Xiaodian and her sister's group was in desperate need of these things. Naturally, if they didn't want to join Xiaodian's team, I wouldn't force them. That was their choice. Hearing what I said, the girls looked at each other in sheer surprise. They couldn't believe that, without even having to beg, I had taken the initiative to leave food behind. When I left earlier, they had despaired, thinking they would definitely starve to death. As for the survivor group I mentioned, they guessed I was connected to them, but perhaps I didn't belong to that group, otherwise I would have called them over immediately. In their minds, if I led a survivor group, I would definitely be the one in charge. So what's your choice? I asked. Realizing my patience was running thin, Xiaoru quickly exchanged glances with the others, then looked at me with determined eyes. We want to join this survivor team. We'll do our best to do whatever we can. Compared to continuing to be abused in exchange for food, she truly preferred to rely on herself. Even though she lacked the ability to survive independently, the opportunity one offered made her incredibly grateful. All right, then just wait here, I said. This location was quite advantageous, very suitable as a base for Xiaodian's group. I wasn't worried about them stealing the supplies and running away either. Even if they did, they couldn't carry much, and with their abilities, they couldn't survive on their own anyway. Just as I was about to leave, Xiaoru suddenly called out again. Please, wait a moment. I was a bit surprised and also a little tired. I turned my head and saw her with red eyes, tears welling up. Thank you. It's nothing, I replied, feeling that I hadn't really done anything major. In the apocalypse, I admitted I wasn't a good person, but I didn't actively do evil either. All my actions were aimed at surviving and reaching Jinling smoothly. Once that was guaranteed, if I could help others a little, I wouldn't refuse. After all, I wasn't a heartless monster. At the Wen family's house, when Xiaodian, Wen Lu, and the other survivors were waiting for my return, their hearts filled with anxiety. Even though I had told them to stay put and not worry, they were all still on pins and needles. They knew very well that even if they fled elsewhere, if I failed, Ing Wu and his gang would find them and kill them without mercy. They were all ordinary people. No gas, no food. Escaping this town was almost impossible. Even if they were lucky enough to get away, the outcome would only be getting caught again or starving to death. Therefore, in everyone's heart, they silently prayed for a miracle. The older man in the group stepped out into the yard and picked up the spilled rice pot. Earlier, when Huang Mao and his cronies picked a fight with me, this pot had been knocked to the ground. The rice inside was only half cooked, and most of it had spilled out, covered in dirt and dust. The old man patiently picked up every single grain, not letting a bit go to waste. After washing it clean, that rice could still be cooked and eaten. The other survivors silently watched him recook the pot of rice, then saw him proceed to the corpses of the gang members, searching and bringing back every single item of supplies they had robbed. Wen Xiaodian stood watching the old man's actions, her heart filled with anxiety and tension. Her mood right now was incredibly conflicted. After hearing the survivors and her sister Wen Lu recount Ing Wu's cruelty, she couldn't help but worry for my safety. It was thanks to me that when Xiaodian was able to return and reunite with her sister, something that, in this apocalypse, many people wouldn't even dare to dream of. On one hand, she hoped I would put my own safety first. Even if I couldn't wipe out Ing Wu and his gang, it would be fine. But on the other hand, she also understood very well that if I didn't deal with Ing Wu, retaliation would strike immediately. What she and Wen Lu would have to face then, she couldn't even imagine. Perhaps it was exactly this unknown that made the fear in her heart grow even larger. Because she couldn't think of any way to resist or protect themselves. She could only helplessly wait for the end to fall upon them. Wen Lu, meanwhile, silently gripped the dagger hidden in her pocket. She knew full well how ruthlessly Ing Wu would treat those who dared to oppose him. Wen Lu didn't want to give Ing Wu's gang the chance to torment her ever again. Thinking of that, the hand gripping the knife trembled slightly. The answer would come eventually, but for her and the other survivors, every second of waiting right now felt as long as a lifetime. Virum. Suddenly, the roar of an engine rang out, making all the survivors, including Wen Lu and Wen Xiaodian, jump in shock. As if waiting for a final verdict, everyone slowly approached the window, their bodies stiff as they looked outside. Wen Lu gripped her dagger tightly, while Wen Xiaodian clenched her hands into fists. Everyone's heart felt like it was about to leap out of their throats. It's Brother Jiang. Wen Lu suddenly cheered, her voice unable to hide her joy. Outside, the bus, towing a small tanker truck and with its roof piled high with sacks, slowly approached the gate and came to a stop. Wen Lu immediately tossed the dagger aside and dashed out the door. She couldn't wait another second to find out what had exactly happened. Wen Xiaodian stood silently looking at the bus, not expecting me to return so quickly while her heart was still in a tangled mess of anxiety. That feeling was exactly like the time she was attacked by the mutant wild boar, only to wake up and see its corpse lying motionless before her eyes. Everything felt like a dream. The other survivors stood frozen. It wasn't until they saw Wen Lu run outside that they snapped back to reality. Let's go look. Let's see what exactly happened. The bus appearing here, without a single gang member tailing it, and even towing a tanker truck. What had happened seemed all too clear. However, even with the truth laid out before their eyes, they still found it hard to believe. Before long, everyone had gathered around the driver's cabin and saw me sitting inside. After I recounted the entire incident, even telling them they could go take over the gang's base and collect the remaining supplies, they still couldn't believe their own ears. How could I, all by myself, with just one vehicle, in such a short amount of time, accomplish what they had deemed hopeless? Something that so many who resisted had met tragic ends trying to do? In just a brief moment, I had dispelled the dark clouds looming over their lives. Looking at the calmness in my words, the whole thing seemed like it was just something I did in passing. They looked at the bus, its windshield riddled with bullet marks, yet not a single one had pierced through. Looking back at me, seeing that I was completely uninjured, they finally truly believed that I was telling the truth, that they had escaped Ing Wu's clutches. The survivors now all felt as if they had been given a second lease on life. The old man walked out of the house, standing behind the crowd. Listening to me speak, his hands trembled, and tears fell endlessly. That wasn't hard to understand at all. He had always been worried about his grandchild, even mentally preparing himself that if there was no way out, he would take the child with him, not leaving them behind to suffer. But now, everything had brightened up. Not only did they not have to die, but they could also live in a safer place, with plenty of food. From now on, they would no longer have to endure the oppression of Ing Wu and his gang. After gradually recovering from the shock, the survivors thanked me profusely. But right then, I also made it clear that I was about to leave. The gas was full, everything was prepared, and I didn't want to delay my journey to Jinling any longer. When Xiaodian and when Lu had reunited, but in my heart, I was still worried about Jiangzhuiying. This town wasn't far from Jinling anymore. I just wanted to set off quickly. Hearing that I was about to leave, everyone was stunned. You've helped us so much, how can you leave right away? When Lu, with her straightforward personality, immediately grabbed the vehicle's door, as if wanting to stop me from leaving. She desperately wanted to do something to repay this favor, and so did Wen Xiaodian. The other survivors all shared the same thought. Even if they didn't know how they could help, at the very least, they could cook a few meals for me. No need, I shook my head. Everything is ready, and the distance isn't far. There's no reason to delay. Helping them, after all, wasn't my original goal, but just a part of the process of gathering gasoline. Everyone, take care of yourselves. Heading to the gas station won't be a problem. Also, I suddenly remembered, and proceeded to tell them about the situation with Xiao Ru and the other girls. When Lu immediately said there was no problem, she had heard about their circumstances long ago and had always sympathized with them. Even so, I still decided to leave. Before going, I marked the location of this town on the map. If I couldn't find gas anywhere else later, I could come back. It was highly likely that in Jinling, all the gasoline had been taken over by the military. And when that happened, even though I had brought as much as possible, I would still face a fuel shortage. This town was quite secluded. If the survivors moved near the gas station, they could also help me keep an eye on the place. Seeing Wen Xiaodian and the others so eager to repay the favor, I made this suggestion. Everyone immediately agreed, feeling happy that they could finally help me, even if it was just a very small task. Wen Xiaodian and Wen Lu stood waving goodbye as my vehicle slowly rolled out of the town. Although the time we spent together wasn't long, watching the bus, towing the tanker and loaded with supplies on the roof, gradually fade into the distance, Wen Xiaodian couldn't help but feel a sense of regret. As for me, sitting in the vehicle, I reached out to open the map, reconfirming the route leading to Jinling. The distance from the town to Jinling wasn't far. I maintained a steady speed the whole way. The closer I got to the city, the more abandoned vehicles there were on the road. I drove the vehicle, pushing a small car blocking the way to the side. My gaze swept over the driver's corpse, which had been eaten down to just its upper half, dangling out the door as the car was shoved aside. These abandoned cars, both inside and out, were stained with corpses. Dried reddish-brown blood, and the foul stench of decomposition spread across the road. Even though I had seen my fair share of corpses before, this desolate scene reeking of death still gave me an indescribable feeling. Before, I had mainly witnessed the terrifying moments when the apocalypse first broke out. But right now, I truly felt that the apocalypse had fully descended. Humanity was left with nothing but a struggle to survive. What made my heart heavy was that most of these cars were facing toward the town. The people inside had tried to flee Jinling, but even after making it this far, they were still dragged out of their cars by zombies and eaten. This definitely wasn't caused by a small group, but rather the traces of a large-scale zombie horde, signaling that the situation ahead was extremely grim. Initially, I thought I would only face the real challenge upon entering Jinling. I didn't expect that even this stretch of road would force me to keep my nerves taut. The outside was already this severe, leaving me with even less hope for the situation inside the city. The bus continuously pushed the blocking cars aside. On the silent road, only the occasional dry thud of collisions rang out, each time sending a chill down my spine. Not long after, houses began to appear on both sides of the road. I kept a vigilant watch while continuing to move forward. The shops lining the street were all in ruins. Glass doors were shattered, and bloodstains were scattered everywhere. A small restaurant with a loose door swung back and forth, letting out a long, drawn-out creak. Yet, there wasn't a single zombie in sight. Before long, a train station appeared in my line of sight. It was a small station. From a distance, I could see a high-speed train stopped on the bridge. Not far away was another train that had derailed, one part hanging in midair, the other end plunged into the road. The cars of both trains were fully loaded with tanks and military trucks. Clearly, these were military trains. I had only ever seen scenes like this on the news before. I didn't expect to run into two of them right here. Recalling how Jiang Zhuiying couldn't buy a train ticket before the apocalypse, I instantly understood. These trains must have been used to transport military supplies in preparation for the impending disaster. Roads and airplanes had probably been requisitioned in the same way. Under those circumstances, even if it caused suspicion or dissatisfaction among the public, it no longer mattered. As long as the news of the apocalypse wasn't spread, minor disturbances wouldn't be enough to affect the overall situation. Perhaps these trains had encountered an accident right as the apocalypse broke out, and were forever stranded here. As I drove, I stared intently at those cold tanks and military trucks. They were all made of top-tier materials, hard steel, and all sorts of precious metals. Seeing them, I couldn't help but drool. My bus was like a material-swallowing machine. The better the stuff it ate, the faster it grew stronger. These military materials were, without a doubt, the best the country could provide. Unfortunately, I had no way to dismantle them. I could only look on helplessly. Suddenly, a thud echoed from inside one of the train cars. The area around the station was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. That sudden sound instantly tensed the atmosphere. My attention shifted entirely to the train car that made the noise. My eyes locked onto it. Thud. Another sound. Right after, a face suddenly pressed against the train car window. Its bloodshot eyes stared madly at my bus. That zombie was wearing a military uniform. It was probably once a soldier or an escort guard. How? A massive number of zombies flooded out from the train car doors like a thick black wave. They rushed out frantically, leaping straight down from the bridge, relentlessly heading toward the bus. Watching the dense horde of zombies rapidly closing in, my scalp went numb. Earlier, I had been wondering where the zombie horde that ate the fleeing people on the road had gone. I didn't expect them to be hiding inside the train cars, and in such massive numbers. Just the first wave alone had to be several hundred. I wasn't worried about them breaking into the vehicle, but the roof and the back of the bus were loaded with food and gasoline. If those were destroyed, it would be a catastrophic loss. Therefore, before the zombie horde could close in, I suddenly slammed on the gas. The bus roared fiercely and accelerated instantly, so agile that it completely contradicted its heavy appearance. The charging zombies were sent flying away. A series of bang 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 sounds echoed along the vehicle's body. Zombies continued to pour out from the train cars endlessly. At first, I managed to leave them a good distance behind, but after that, I had no choice but to keep my foot pinned to the gas and charge straight ahead. On this road, only my bus was running, surrounded by a dense horde of zombies. A few times, the vehicle was almost submerged, but I didn't slow down at all. Whether it was zombies or cars in front of me, I didn't flinch. Finally, after barreling forward for over 1,000 meters, I managed to escape the zombie horde. They still tried to chase, but the distance was safe enough. I looked in the rearview mirror and understood that with such a massive number of zombies, even if I had a way to dismantle those steel blocks, I wouldn't be able to take them peacefully. Fortunately, I had only observed from the vehicle and had no intention of getting out to search. This experience made me realize that public places like that needed to be avoided unless absolutely necessary, because they were veritable zombie nests. I also noticed that zombies had a tendency to hide. Even though there were quite a few wandering the streets, many more hid themselves in dark corners. When people entered houses or enclosed spaces, they could easily fall into the trap of an entire horde. That made me even more worried for Jiang Zhuiying. She was hiding in a house, but no one could guarantee that place was truly safe. It was highly possible that while she thought she was hiding, A horde of zombies was already quietly waiting right outside her door. Jinling, 20 kilometers. Next to it was an arrow pointing straight ahead. I looked up at the sign hanging overhead, then glanced down at the map. Immediately after, I suddenly turned the wheel, turning onto a branch road. After driving a few hundred meters, I charged straight into a flower nursery. I didn't slow down, crashing directly through the main gate and barreling inside. Howl! Howl! Over a dozen zombies shrieked as they lunged out from among the flower beds, but I slammed the gas, crushing them beneath the tires. This nursery grew all sorts of flowers and plants, many of which were rare breeds. In the past, they could have sold for a very high price, but right now, I didn't hesitate at all, just plowing straight through, destroying everything in my path. I drove deep inside and stopped in front of a large greenhouse. This was the location I had marked on the map, the closest place to Jinling. There were no residential areas around, nor were there any shops or notable scavenging spots. Such a remote place, even if survivors passed by, they wouldn't bother coming in. I slowly drove the bus into a hidden corner, then pressed a button on the control panel. A soft click sounded. The small tanker truck towed behind immediately detached from the bus. My vehicle was carrying too many things. The small truck looked beat up. Even if it was discovered, it wouldn't be too dangerous. But the tanker was different. It was too conspicuous. I had guessed earlier that it would be very hard to find gasoline in Jinling. If I kept towing a tanker, it would be no different from carrying a fat piece of bait through a pack of beasts. Better safe than sorry. Avoid whatever risks can be avoided. After filling up the gas tank, I finally drove the vehicle out of the flower nursery. Back on the main road, after driving a bit further, the sign for Jinling appeared before my eyes again. I was getting very close. Zhuiying, wait for me. I switched the map on the screen to the previously saved address, the shelter where Jiang Zhuiying and I had agreed to meet. Then, I tried sending her a message. Ever since the apocalypse broke out, my phone had lost its signal in Jiangbei City. Up on the mountain roads, there was even less reception. I hoped it would be different once I entered Jinling. But when I saw the send failed notification and the no service icon pop up in the corner of the screen, my heart sank. Jinling didn't have a signal either. If I could have contacted Jiang Zhuiying beforehand, I wouldn't be this worried. Right now, I just wanted to find her as soon as possible. By now, Jinling was definitely a place survivors stayed far away from. The abandoned vehicles on the road were all facing out of the city. Only my bus was driving against the flow, heading inside. At first, the number of zombies on the road wasn't high. I could almost pass them before they had a chance to launch. But the deeper I went, the denser the zombies became. Howl! The incessant shrieks forced me to stay on high alert. The bus was constantly attacked by the zombie horde, but thanks to the armor upgraded with mutant energy, those collisions didn't cause any significant damage. Even so, the number of zombies was simply too great. The ones left behind continued to give chase. Looking at the monitor, I felt as if I were barreling through a sea of zombies. Up ahead, the numbers were even greater. If this kept up, no matter how strong the base vehicle was, being completely surrounded like this would still be extremely dangerous. Many ants can bite an elephant to death, let alone these ferocious zombies. Screech. A female zombie suddenly clung to the front of the vehicle. One of her feet was still wearing a high heel, her pantyhose torn to shreds, her face and body covered in blood. Her cloudy eyes were glued to me through the windshield, her long nails continuously scratching against the glass. With that length, her nails should have broken long ago, but after mutating, they were so hard they were no different from a beast's claws. I gave her a glance and then ignored her. Before mutating, she must have been a trendy city girl, but now she was just a bloodthirsty monster. I floored the gas pedal and simultaneously honked the horn. The piercing sound echoed across the zombie-infested street, like throwing a stone into a calm lake, instantly stirring up everything. The zombies in the distance that hadn't noticed me yet all turned their heads in unison. Then, without warning, they charged madly straight at the bus. Behind, to the left, I estimated there were at least several hundred of them, maybe even more. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel tightly. Thud, thud. The ones in front were continuously sent flying as the vehicle barreled forward at high speed. But the number clinging to the sides, the doors, and even climbing onto the roof was growing by the second. The base vehicle was sinking deeper and deeper into the sea of zombies, the tires rolling over piles of bodies. Even with the gas pedal floored to the max, I could clearly feel the vehicle struggling for every meter. But I didn't stop. My eyes were glued straight ahead, completely ignoring the female zombie still frantically scratching at the glass. Just a little more. Almost there. When the vehicle could barely move forward anymore, I pressed the instant acceleration button. A heavy boom rang out. All the surrounding zombies were instantly blasted away. The explosive power of the base vehicle forcefully carved out a path through the sea of corpses. The stretch of road ahead had drawn all the zombies to gather around me. The moment the path opened up, I temporarily escaped the encirclement. But instead of continuing straight, I suddenly cranked the wheel for a sharp turn. A piercing screech of friction rang out, and one of the tires even lifted off the ground. The moment the turn was complete, I pressed the button to activate the air cannon. 10, 9, 8. Thud. Smash. Thud. The zombies swarmed over again. In the blink of an eye, the front was packed with ferocious faces. They frantically clawed at the windshield, their dead eyes locked onto me, as if wanting to tear the prey before them to shreds. Sitting in the driver's seat, I could clearly feel the entire vehicle shuddering violently. My face paled slightly, but my mouth continued to whisper the countdown in rhythm. 3, 2,